J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I will now call this meeting to order. This is the first time I am chairing a meeting, and I would like to welcome Mr. Patzer, have I pronounced that correctly, who is sitting in for Mr. Matty for a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Given that Mr. Matty is in the house, he'll be back very shortly, and I will turn the chair over to him with great joy. So welcome to meeting number 102 of the Standing Committee on the Environment and Sustainable Development, and pursuant to the order that we are undertaking our study of Bill C-317, a bill, an act, rather, to establish a national strategy respecting flood and drought forecasting. And I must say that today's meeting is in a hybrid format. You're used to hearing this pursuant to the standing orders. And therefore, members are attending in person in the room and remotely. To ensure that things go well, I have a couple of reminders for you. I'm sure that all the members of the committee know how to use Zoom, know how to use the interpretation service, and how to raise their hands, and are aware of all the practices to ensure that sound is in line with requirements, and we have carried out the sound tests as required. And I think that given that the connection tests have been carried out and that we're all here, I will now turn the floor over to a member of this committee, MP Francis Scarpellegia, MP for St. Louis region, as part of Montreal, and especially the sponsor of this bill. You have 10 minutes, sir.
John Pomeroy for being here today at the table with me. Dr. Pomeroy is the chair of the Canada Research Chair in the Water Resources and Climate Change, and he is the inspiration behind this bill. He helped draft this bill, and he patiently taught me about flood and drought forecasting. Today, though, I will be concentrating on flood forecasting for simplicity, but I know Dr. Pomeroy would be happy to take questions about drought conditions in Canada and the art of drought forecasting. Je vous demanderais si vous pouvez
I will take you back to when we learned to plot graphs back in high school. When we drew those graphs, you know, the two axes, the vertical x-axis and the horizontal y-axis. And the vertical axis and the horizontal one are useful for discussing the process of flood forecasting.
The axis, or the x dimension, the top-down process in flood forecasting. And when I speak of the top-down process, I'm talking about weather forecasting. Now, it's top-down. It's not particularly democratic, but it's the technology that dictates that weather forecasting is a top-down process. Images come from satellites down to Earth, and they form the basis of weather forecasts, which are fundamental to flood and drought forecasting. When we talk about, effectivement, lorsqu'on parle.
So indeed, when it comes to weather forecasting, technology really dictates the fact that it's a top-down process. Weather forecasting is carried out by the Meteorologic Service of Canada in Canada, and the Canadian Meteorological Centre, its main facility, is housed in an unassuming building bristling with satellite dishes on Highway 40 in Dorval. Real bouquet of satellite dishes. If you ever drive by there, you'll surely see them all yourselves on the roof. One could easily assume that it's a sports bar with all those antennas picking up the many signals of the variety of sports matches. The horizontal axis, the y-axis, represents the collaborative process involving the provinces and the territories. In order to forecast floods, you have to do more than forecast the weather. You also need a lot of information about the water levels, the speed of movement of waters in our lakes and rivers and so on. And this involves the participation of those who are on the ground, able to see what's actually going on in the provinces and territories.
Data is collected by water gauges and stations located in water bodies across the country, water bodies that are in provincial and territorial jurisdiction, as we know that the water resources belong to the provinces and territories. And this is done under a collaborative and a jointly financed federal-provincial program called the National Hydrological Survey. Now, climate change, we all know, means more frequent and intense flooding and drought events. We therefore need a more accurate flood forecasting system with greater lead times to allow communities to better prepare for floods and to better buttress against them. Fortunately, flood forecasting methods and technologies are rapidly evolving. Technology now allows us to build more sophisticated flood forecasting models that cover larger geographic areas and to which we can attract probabilities of flood risk. Because these models cover larger areas, greater cooperation is required among the jurisdictions, among the provinces, and also among the provinces and the federal government. Because, as I said at the very start, the federal government is responsible for weather forecasting and has some in-house capabilities that are important to flood forecasting, namely in terms of gauging water flows and water levels, et cetera. So it's a collaborative process involving the provinces and the territories and the federal government. Because these models cover larger areas, greater computing power is required to run complex dynamic models. And we're talking here about supercomputers. So supercomputers are required for this kind of large-scale, complicated, complex, probabilistic forecasting. Now, there are many benefits to this cooperation that is in fact a reality already. There are many benefits when flood forecasters work together. As Dr. Pomeroy has pointed out, while some modelers in Canada may predict major floods every year, others may not be called on to predict even one flood in their entire career. So a national collaborative approach would create opportunities for shared experiences and professional development among flood forecasters in different provinces. There's already a community of forecasters who meet to discuss best practices, but we need a more formal, permanent structure to harness flood forecasting knowledge from jurisdictions across Canada and better move forward together. Some will say that this structure already exists within ECCC, within Environment and Climate Change Canada, and that the department is already involved in flood forecasting. But to quote Dr. Pomeroy, ECCC has not established a national hydrological forecasting service. They have established a federal river and flow forecasting system over part of the country that is exploratory and top-down, but it does not have the participation of the provinces and territories. Nowhere in the Canadian Meteorological Service's published core mandate does one find a requirement to engage with provinces and territories on flood and drought forecasting. What is being developed currently is a federal system of stream flow prediction, not a cooperative national in scope flood forecasting system, and there's a difference. At the moment, the Canadian Meteorological Service stream flow models help predict the volume of water passing through an area under different weather scenarios. This information is useful in decisions about irrigation and hydroelectricity generation. Stream flow models are also being used to improve weather forecasts. For example, if the Canadian Meteorological Centre predicts stream flow will be high because soil moisture in a basin is high, resulting in greater runoff because the land is not absorbing rain, this will be an indicator of greater expected evaporation from the soil. Evaporation in turn influences atmospheric dynamics. With high levels of soil moisture and evaporation, the energy and water in the atmosphere is greater. This in turn influences the weather and the weather forecast. Mais pour prévoir les inondations avec encore plus de précision.
But to predict floods with even greater accuracy, we do need a more nuanced approach, drawing on local data.
Forecasting involves the added complexity of factoring in soil moisture, groundwater saturation, the state of glaciers and snowpack, the topology of the river network, river pinch points, and the state of riverbank erosion. Human decisions pertaining to the regulation of dams and reservoirs must also be factored in. In Canada, flood forecasting is further complicated by the fact that we are a northern country with mountainous regions and lots of ice. River ice jams can raise water levels many meters above the norm, and these don't occur only during spring ice cover breakup. They can happen in the fall freeze-up and midwinter breakup periods as well. Another factor impacting flood risk that has been recently highlighted by Dr. Pomeroy is wildfires, which of course we've seen a lot of in the last couple of years. Wildfires destroy tree canopy, leading to much denser snowpack as more snow accumulates on the ground. Loss of canopy also translates into less shade and more direct sunlight hitting snow, causing it to melt faster. The result is earlier and stronger spring runoff and a greater risk of downstream flooding. Le but de ce projet de loi n'est pas de réinventer.
This bill is not intended to reinvent the wheel. Rather, it encourages the Government of Canada to adapt and to make better use of the latest developments in flood and drought forecasting, both the science and the methods, now that these disasters are more frequent and more intense given climate change.
To Europe, we see that even independent states can achieve the unity of purpose required for accurate flood forecasting on a continental scale. According to Dr. Pomeroy, and I'm sure you'll speak more about this, the prototype European flood forecasting
Monsieur
system.
Scarpaleggia.
No.
Mr. Scarpaleggia? Oh, my. Oh, very well. He'll pick up on all this later. Dr. Pomeroy will pick up on this, about what's been happening in Europe and how relevant that model is for Canada. Thank you very much, Mr. Scarpaleggia. Mr. Pomeroy, welcome to our committee meeting. I think this is the second time we've had you with us. I remind you that Mr. Pomeroy is the Canada Research Chair, Water Resources and Climate Change at the University of Saskatchewan. You have the floor, sir, for 5 minutes.
Very much. Thank you very much. 11 years ago, my ideas around what became this bill began to gel as it rained for 3.5 days over the mountains west of Calgary, Alberta, in late June of 2013, 250 millimeters on a late-line snowpack. The flood started. We had 15 people in the field from the University of Saskatchewan, including several professors or colleagues. And what we found was absolutely incredible, the generation of these floods in the mountains, rushing down towards Canmore, towards High River, and eventually towards Calgary. What we did not see in time, even after the evacuations were starting in Canmore, was the flood warning from the province of Alberta that a massive flood was on the way. 4 people died in that flood. Over $5 billion of damages occurred in the region. It was the most expensive natural disaster in Canadian history at that time. Almost a year later, a year and a month later, in Saskatchewan, which only has had snowmelt flooding since it incorporated as a province in 1905, the rain started in eastern Saskatchewan, over 200 millimeters of rain, causing rainfall-based flooding over eastern Saskatchewan in basins that had only had snowmelt flooding at a time of year when the creeks are normally dry and farmers are looking after their growing crops and all of that. Again, this overwhelmed the provincial capability, which was designed for snowmelt flooding, which you can plan for by watching the snowpack accumulate. So, these were incredible lessons that we had to better understand flood forecasting in Canada. The other lesson is as Mrs. Scarpaleggia mentioned, the European Centre for Medium-Range Weather Forecasting was running an experimental product in 2013, which gave a reasonable estimate of the magnitude of the Calgary floods 10 days before it happened. They didn't communicate it to Canadians. It was just a test product, but it showed what was possible And it gave us an aspiration to what Canadians could do if we brought our technologies together and worked together as a country on this exceedingly difficult problem. Flood and drought damages have risen dramatically in Canada since then and are expected to rise further due to extreme weather and water events, due to climate change, coupled with our growing communities and our increasing agriculture and industrial production. Floodplains are growing, droughts are intensifying, and many community farms and industries are impacted by this. In 2022, the Aquanomics report estimated that to 2050, GDP loss in Canada due to droughts, floods, and storms will total $174 billion. In the Global Water Futures Program, which I direct, we estimate that Canadian damages have exceeded $40 billion only up to last year from the year 2000 from these events. So things are getting worse. How do we deal with it in Canada? We have the prediction in Canada follows a piecemeal governance approach. We have provincial and territorial systems developed bottom-up, which work to meet local needs, and a federal system developed top-down from the weather forecast system, as mentioned. Neither are interoperable, and neither meet the full suite of current needs we have in the country. The fragmented approach has led to slow adoption of new technology forecast systems, and this is what countries like the United States do, this is what Europe does, this is what other major countries do. In Global Water Futures, we established, with the help of Environment Canada, a pilot forecast demonstration project for the Yukon Territory. We developed a state-of-the-art prediction system for the Yukon River Basin, and we transferred this to the Yukon government for its operational forecasts. Technical challenges in running such a complex hydrological computer system meant that we've been running the system for the Yukon government since 2018. Remember, the Yukon Territory is 40,000 people. It doesn't have the technical expertise so far to run a system like this without assistance. A federal, provincial, territorial cooperative system could far better ensure that resources and technologies are available to support operational forecasting and prediction from these co-developed systems. A few recommendations for how we might have a more coherent flood and drought forecasting and prediction framework in Canada is one, the framework should be developed to coordinate local, regional, federal, and international efforts. Remember, we have shared river basins with the United States, and to enable the authorization of state-of-the-art science and technological advances in forecasting and prediction. The national framework should be co-developed with a top-down and bottom-up approach to be mindful of local realities and build credibility and trust between academics, users, government, policy, and practice.
Monsieur Pomeroy, je dois malheureusement vous
Unfortunately, Mr. Pomeroy, I must interrupt you.
avoir l'occasion.
I think you'll have a chance to elaborate on your recommendations as you respond to questions put by members of the committee. Let me check something with Mr. Mazzi.
2 petites secondes, tout le monde.
In just a moment, everyone, we will just turn the chair over to our chair, Mr. Mazzi.
Put that on. Okay, I guess we start off with questioning, and Mr. Leslie, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. Obviously, as a representative of Manitoba, we have been prone to floods for centuries, but getting worse of late thanks to some of our neighbors and some land use changes in particular. And I recently had the chance to speak with Manitoba's Hydrological Forecast Centre to get a bit of a better understanding of how we could benefit from a national forecasting service, because obviously we have a desire to control our water flows and mitigate, to retain water and mitigate floods. Not to say there's any concerns with that conversation, but I'm hoping for some points of clarity. I'll start with the sponsor, but perhaps Mr. Pomeroy, you can aid in some of the responses. One of the concerns, or one of my concerns, was if we have a federal service, there may be confusion from what comes out of the province. Obviously, we rely on, particularly Manitoba, as a leader in this space on those flood forecasts. Would there be two streams of information, or would it be the federal national organization sharing with the province for them to distribute the flood forecasting? Because the concern would be if you have two sets of different forecast information, it might not align and might lead to some of the challenges that you've alluded to already.
Is that to me? Yeah.
Whoever's best placed.
Well, I will pass it to Dr. Pomeroy, but I would expect that there would be the coordination would prevent those kinds of overlapping situations from occurring. I think that's part of the objective here, is to rationalize the system and enhance and to improve the system of flood forecasting and drought forecasting. So my understanding is this system would, this new structure would actually prevent that from happening. Is that correct?
Yes, what I've proposed, and in discussions with the provincial forecasters and federal government, what we think is the best pose is that the high-end, exceedingly complex computer models are run federally and tied into the weather forecast, and then but then tailored to the needs of the provinces so that they can issue the forecast as the one authoritative source in there. Okay. And also taking into account multiple model outputs. Remember, there's nothing preventing Google from doing this as well, and then, or others, so we can get lots of different forecasts, and that adds to confusion. So the idea is to coordinate, so it's something authoritative, and that this is what we go with.
Okay. So right now, as it stands, are the provinces and territories harmonized in their statistical techniques that they use for the hydrological concepts? Like, are we currently aligned, or would there be necessity through this body to have the provinces work with the same processes from a statistical standpoint?
Go ahead.
In 2019, with the help of Environment Canada, we convened a meeting of the 13 territorial and provincial forecasting groups. They had never met before. So we started an informal community of practice to share things, but they were all building the wheel separately by themselves, and everyone said, oh, we don't have enough resources to do this. So there's a lot to be gained by working together, and that's where perhaps a federal initiative can help grease those wheels to help it happen. I think a lot of the activity is going to be provincial, but it varies tremendously depending on jurisdiction. We have big, rich provinces which have fairly sophisticated systems, and we have smaller provinces and territories which are using Excel spreadsheets. So it's pretty different, that capability right now.
So one of the things I learned in talking with our province's forecasters is they're pretty sophisticated, but in the areas of population. So northern and more remote locations don't have that same sort of technology. Would this be a way that we could have those gaps kind of filled so that more northern and remote Indigenous communities might have access to the same level of forecasting information?
Yes, I think the objective will be continental scale forecasting and prediction, and so that even the really remote parts of the north would have this. The other thing I say is that the system can predict many things, including soil moisture, including forest fire likelihood due to duff layer moisture, and aspects of drought. And so a single system can have multiple purposes, including drought and a wildfire risk, which could be really beneficial.
How would that information be shared? Because I think that's a good point. If we could actually better understand and mitigate wildfires, how would that information be shared through this National Forecasting Service to the Canadian Forest Service or whatever appropriate body that would be?
Right now, the federal system is shared just with a few select users. It's not a public system. Through there, a cooperative system could, with the imprint of the provinces and okay of the provinces, be shared more widely in that sense. Again, the crucial thing is to avoid confusion over what the risks are, and but to maximize the outflow of that information and the information sharing.
Would we anticipate that the National Forecasting Center would be using LiDAR flood mapping for the high-risk areas, or would that be outside of the scope, would you predict?
The hydraulic routing that is usually done using LiDAR flood mapping has been proven to be best done locally. And that's in particular where the communities and the provincial governments have tremendous expertise, and that's where their roles, as one example, would come in very strongly into this.
So one of the challenges, obviously, with predicting climate change and the impacts of, I think, is aided but perhaps more easily accessible was the land use changes that have happened over a number of years. But I think that's also something that is information that's held and known more locally. How would you see the provinces and municipalities working with the National Centre to try to share some of that information so you have the best assumptions in your modeling?
With a good community of practice and shared system that's truly federal provincial, then you have that information going up into the national model. For instance, we've been working on wetland drainage impacts on changing hydrology in the prairies, and we've developed algorithms that are now into the federal model called MESH, which can look at that and over time say, well, as these wetlands are drained, there'll be this change in flood likelihood over time.
Okay, sorry, but was there anything, did you need anything tabled there or anything, Brendan? You're good? Okay. Another 6 minutes, Mr. Van Couberton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Pomeroy and MP Scarpelagia, Mr. Chair, today. Thank you for bringing this very important bill forward. To you, Dr. Pomeroy, it sure seems to me like floods and droughts and things of the sort related to extreme weather events happen more frequently these days. It seems as though a lot of that impression might be driven by 24-hour news cycle and a heightened awareness and attention on those matters. But is it accurate to suggest that property damage and natural disasters on that scale with respect to floods and droughts and extreme weather on the coast are happening more and more frequently?
Certainly the payouts for these disasters have increased dramatically. There was roughly $1 billion of damages from these events from Confederation up to the year 2000. We're estimating it's about $40 billion since the year 2000. So that's gone up quite a bit. In some basins, flood frequency and magnitude has increased. In others, it's changed in timing. But there is global evidence now that drought frequency and occurrence is increasing. Also, there's direct scaling of rainfall intensity with air temperatures. As air temperatures go up, storms become more intense. It comes out of the calculations and it comes out of the observations as well that we see around the world. So we're seeing this, and we're seeing these shifts. I mean, areas that used to get their floods from snowmelt are now getting it from rainfall or rain on snow events. And so that's really problematic for Canadians because we're getting floods that we're not familiar with occurring. And all of our engineering designs go back over a century from the 20th century's climate, and now we're facing the need for designs that are based on what is still to come.
Yeah, thank you. We're experiencing some pretty wacky watershed events in Halton region right now because we don't have a snow melt. There's been a considerable amount of rain recently, but it's just a very, very different situation in our creeks and rivers. But I'm very concerned about the impact that will have on our flood mapping because I don't think that our flood mapping will necessarily change as a result of changing weather patterns. Is it important for conservation authorities in Ontario to go back to the drawing books a little bit and look at some of those flood mapping, or is it strictly still about the elevation of various places and their proximity to streams, creeks, and rivers?
The ability to calculate future floodplains has been developed. Colleagues and I from Global Water Futures have a paper in review describing the technique, which we applied it to the Bow River above Calgary in response to those events to look at how those flood frequencies will change by the end of the century. And so it's possible to do this for all of Canada now. We simply need to sit down and do it. So.
Okay. And if we are seeing these flood frequencies increase, certainly the magnitude of the destruction is going up because of what we've built along those areas. Perhaps that's a warning for the future to cut it out. Otherwise, we're going to experience more and more destruction from those. But what can be what's the cause? What could be attributed as a cause for the increase in frequency for these flooding events?
The change in frequency of the flooding, occurrence of flooding, sometimes is due to development. Our communities really like to develop floodplains because that's the most desirable property, and people want lakefronts or riverfronts for their homes, but it's also the change in the nature of storms. So storms cluster much more now than they used to. We get more multiple day storms and greater storm intensities, greater rainfall intensities, and now in some cases more rain on snow, depending on the elevation. So all these are working together to make those changes to our flood regimes in Canada. We now even have glacier melt caused floods. The peak flood in Whitehorse, Yukon occurred in 2021, started by that heat dome that occurred that year, and it was the Llewellyn Glacier and other snowpacks in the mountains above Whitehorse melting away at rapid pace. They'd never seen this before. So this is what we've got now.
Okay. So in what ways, with respect to all of these realities of the current the current situation and what we can do to mitigate some of these destructive events, or at least mitigate the impact that they have, in what ways will a national strategy aid in the delivery of more timely and reliable forecasting and information?
The number of things. One is with an adequate prior forecast, people can take personal action. You can get things out of your basement, you can evacuate the area, you can secure your businesses, you can protect your farms. Lots you can do. Lots of sandbagging can be done with a few days' notice. You can reduce, provincial agencies can reduce the water storage in reservoirs to provide capacity for water to fill in. Furthermore, the better predictions can allow for better floodplain mapping, help the insurance industry come up with reliable and suitable costs for flood insurance across the country that are based on the best science, and also allow for communities and provinces and territories to plan for future development to avoid excess costs in the future. These things can be used for water supply forecasting. It can help us look at irrigation expansion. It can help us restore natural functions to rivers and wetlands, deltas, on and on. It's many, many things. And hydroelectricity, which is a massive one.
Thanks, Dr. Pomeroy.
Van Goorden, Monique. Ms. Posé, 6 minutes.
Merci. Alors,
Very well. My question then is somewhat in line with what's been asked so far. We know that there are 4 departments involved, though, to touch on that. I think this is part of the bill. There's the Minister of the Environment, Minister of Agriculture and Agro-Food, Public Safety as well. Basically, there are 4 in all. In the strategy, which is laid out in Section 3, where we cover new investments with an overview of infrastructures and a national structure, we see a National Hydrological Forecasting Service to be created. So that's what I'm focusing on. Why not first really rework Canada's meteorological services as they exist? Why create a different structure? Is that advantageous? Why not simply gather people together and review how CMS works? As we said at the outset, both of us, I believe, the Canadian Meteorological Services of Canada really works on a top-down model. It's not a collaborative model. We feel that the new system should include much more cooperation, be well structured, though. So this bill aims to structure that sort of interaction. But to cooperate, we need to obviously lean on the Canadian Meteorological Services, which are up and running. This is a program that allows provinces and the federal government to work together to share costs. The aim is really to evolve the thinking around the management of flood forecasting to get the best of both worlds, as I was explaining, vertical and horizontal. You know, obviously, the weather forecasting comes down to us from satellites, really. Like it or not, it's a top-down model. That said, we do need more horizontal cooperation across the local governments and territories and so on. It's really to ensure that everyone is working together and working with all the pieces of the puzzle. And many of those pieces are already on the board, but at present, the approach is somewhat informal. So we're simply asking for this informal approach, which is heading in the right direction, to be structured and recognized with a proposal, which, of course, could evolve, but to begin with would include what I've mentioned so that we can move forward together. We do know that the departments and so on tend to work independently. They don't always cooperate. This is the new style, which is, of course, being used more and more. It seems to me that part of the work laid out in the bill is already being carried out, though. So will the bill really improve matters? Will a national strategy, and we know that national strategies are things that Liberals tend to prefer. But anyway, would a national strategy in this matter, in flood and drought forecasting, really be an improvement on current approaches? Let's look at Quebec. Quebec has its own territorial protection program and plans for its own territory and flooding of it. So how will a national Canadian plan really improve the situation when it has already been taken over by the governments of the provinces or the territories, such as in Quebec? The provinces are moving forward on these matters, of course. The aim of cooperation would be to allow for sharing of information. As Dr. Pomeroy has pointed out, there are some provinces that are working well, have very good resources, have good capacity in this area, a good deal of expertise. However, other provinces aren't really up to scratch. That's the idea. That's the federal model, isn't it? Some provinces need a little more help, can benefit from interacting with others. The system allows us all to work together. Even provinces, though, that are well-resourced in this area are seeing knowledge move forward so quickly that they, too, could benefit from sharing knowledge and sharing more recent practices. The area, then, is very dynamic, you see. I think that everyone could benefit from working more closely together. Could you assure us that this bill is really meeting a real need and is not just, proposing a different way of making sure the federal government does what other governments are already doing? No, as I was explaining, at least 4 departments are involved, and they tend to work independently at the federal level. And this strategy will encourage them to work together, hopefully to work better together, and to come up with a more united service.
Ms. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the member for putting forward this important bill. Thank Mr. Pomeroy for being here as a witness today, and for all your work. We know that the just unprecedented weather events that have impacted Canadians. It used to be that we were talking about a scary future, but now we're talking about the scary present that we are living through. In British Columbia, we're experiencing multi-year droughts at the same time as extreme flooding and evacuations. And so I noticed the preamble of this talks a bit about how there are communities and industries, notably the farming industry, that are inordinately impacted by floods and droughts, and that's so true. We also know that many Indigenous communities face far greater risk of weather-related emergencies. How do you see governments working with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities and nations to implement these kind of policies and really making sure that they are leading some of this work?
Well, I'll pass it on to Dr. Pomeroy after my initial comments, but my understanding is that the strategy would bring everyone to the table. So it would receive input, it would benefit from input from all stakeholders, provinces, territories, industry, First Nations, Métis, and then the idea is to see how best to translate the predictive knowledge to how communities on the ground are buttressing themselves against these natural disasters. Is that a correct way of seeing it, or I'm sure you can add more nuance, Dr. Pomeroy?
It's a start. One thing we found in the Global Water Futures program is that there was almost nowhere in Canada where there was a flood prediction point on First Nations territory, on Indigenous territory. We put them in the big cities, and that's where the gauges went, and that's where the prediction points went. So it is an easy win there, is to start making sure that we're actually predicting flooding directly on reserves. The second is to bring in Indigenous knowledge into this, and it's something we did with co-led projects because there may not be gauges there for a long time, but there are long memories of when floods have occurred, how they occurred, when they occurred, things like that. And you bring that in to do a kind of a test of our predictions to make sure that they have some reality to them. And the other is that we tend to focus on, for floods, we focus on economic damages. So we talk about $6 billion in Calgary. We don't talk about human suffering so much. And the suffering is often much more profound in the more vulnerable and poorer communities. And there are some in Manitoba and elsewhere in the country that have had long-term evacuations due to flooding, and they're not getting back to their communities. And this is destructive in such a fundamental way to the whole society so we need to better account for those problems.
Thanks so much. The impact on farmers is profound when it comes to drought and flooding, and the economic costs, the human costs. I'm curious if you can speak more broadly to our food system and the impacts that the flooding and drought have on our food systems here in Canada.
Well, the recent drought has had an incredible impact on our agriculture. So many ranchers in the southwestern prairies have been reducing their herds, also in BC and elsewhere. In the Palliser Triangle area of southwestern Saskatchewan, southern Alberta, the dryland farmers have had disastrous years for multiple years now. And the irrigators, that's why irrigation was introduced to this area. In the part of that one of the irrigation districts just had the announcement that they'll be getting half of their normal allocation of water because of a shortage of runoff from the Rockies anticipated this year. So it is affecting food in many ways. Manitoba has experienced many years with flooding where it was impossible to get crops going, and some provinces have sometimes had flooding and drought in the same years, depending where you were, which farms were affected. So crop insurance carries this, but crop insurance is based on averages, and so long-term droughts, long-term flooding starts to decrease the benefit there, and it tends to be heavily subsidized by the rest of society. So the whole thing becomes eventually untenable if we don't take some action. But by prediction, if a farmer knew reliably in January what the drought situation would be, and they could plan their seeding, plan what they're going to do with their fields, the irrigation district could better manage what they're doing, that we could reap a tremendous economic benefit and a food security benefit from this as well. That's what I'd like to see in the future.
Thank you so much. Mr. Scarpaleggia, as a member of the government, I'm sure you've had conversations with the Minister of Environment about the importance of freshwater security, flooding, droughts. Why do you think that the minister hasn't implemented this flood and drought strategy before, 8 years in?
Well, I know that he's very supportive of this bill. I've spoken to him about it. As I was saying at the beginning, ECCC is working on elements of this system that we're trying to create, and I think that the government should be working faster and more broadly with the provinces and territories and First Nations and industry and so on. I think it should be a priority, and that's what the bill is signaling, that we need to move a bit faster, but some work has been done. There's work happening within the federal bureaucracy. It may be disjointed, but it's happening. And as Dr. Pomeroy said, there have been meetings, but they're not terribly formalized, and they're more ad hoc. So
Whoa. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you. I was enamored when you were talking about agriculture. So
Okay, so I didn't
we're
mean
going to go
over.
on to our second round, and we'll start with Mr. Cram for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair or Acting Chair, I could say, and Mr. Chair, good to see you in the witness location today, and Dr. Pomeroy, thank you for joining us as well. I think everyone can recognize the value of improved drought forecasting and improved flood forecasting. I think we also have to recognize the value of being good stewards of the public purse. So I wonder if you can give us an idea of how much this entire system and program will cost in terms of upfront costs as well as the annual operations.
I don't know. And I don't know because I'm not in government and I don't have access to the information that government would have around this kind of issue. If it has this information, the whole point of the bill is to not pressure, but to incite government to collect that information to estimate what such a system would look like and how much it would cost. And then the government can decide whether it feels it's worth the cost or not. But my role is really to try and accelerate things a little bit. But I don't know. I don't have the capacity to cost out a system that is so incredibly complex, and that I have an understanding of a little bit, but nowhere near as the understanding that Dr. Pomeroy has.
Okay, then maybe I'll ask the same question to Dr. Pomeroy. If we don't have it down to the penny, do you have a high-level estimate, ballpark figure?
It's not something we've costed out. My feeling is that this would reduce redundancies that we have right now. We right now have 13 systems duplicating themselves across the country without help on some of the fundamentals. It would make each of those more efficient. It might reduce their costs at the provincial level. Federally, we're having a federal system in place, and it's a matter of coordination to make it a national system. We also could benefit from a national system because the Americans have something called the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology. They put in, I put it in Canadian dollars, 489 million Canadian dollars over 5 years in this. They're drawing heavily upon the Canadian models we developed in Global Water Futures that aren't in operation in Canada yet, but are going to be in the United States, including all our shared river basins. So if we have a system that could take advantage of what's being developed in the continent, then we can apply things very efficiently, I think.
Could I add something, Mr. Graham? Yeah. I have a very strong hunch, given the figures we've heard about the cost of natural disasters in the last short while. I have a very strong hunch that the benefit would outweigh the cost by multiple orders. I mean, so I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Okay. According to the website for Natural Resources Canada, they have something called the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program, which I believe was launched late last year. I'd just like to read a quick quote from the website. It says, "The Government of Canada is investing over $227 million in the ongoing Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program to meet this need by updating and expanding its existing flood mapping capabilities." And it goes on to say that Natural Resources Canada is leading this program in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada and Public Safety Canada. Can you give us an idea of how the initiative contained in Bill C-317 will align with these initiatives that are going on at Natural Resources Canada?
Well, before I pass it on to Dr. Pomeroy, I would suspect that a sophisticated national flood forecasting system would simply add to the accuracy of the flood mapping that is being done by NRCan, but I don't know if that's a correct way of looking at it.
The NRCan program, and I should say that I have funding from that to the University of Saskatchewan with our colleagues from the University of Calgary and Laval and McMaster. But we're using the Environment Canada models that we developed with Environment Canada for that. So we're trying to coordinate it at the university end, and we're getting some support there, but a more formal process to do that would be very, very helpful, because NRCan should be absolutely benefiting from the National Prediction Program in this floodplain mapping. So it's something that the individuals are trying to do, but it's ad hoc and kind of fragile, I'd say.
Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time? I'm done. Okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Mr. Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair and Mr. Chair and witness.
Because he
We're all-
hesitates. It's
And
like,
Madame Posey, you did a
I'm
great
not here
job.
for long.
This is a collaboration today. You've touched on a couple of things, Dr. Pomeroy. You mentioned about international a little bit in terms of the United States using some of the modeling from Canada. A constituent of mine has an advanced hydrology company that's been doing work in Bangladesh. It's called, the company is Hyde Tech Geomorphic. And they're doing hydraulic monitoring, they're doing fluvial geomorphology, all these words that have to do with droughts and floods. But working in Bangladesh, having access to the data there and then making the models. Also working with municipalities on helping municipal governments determine where their risks are. Could you maybe speak to Canada's role internationally, or Mr. Scarpellegia, where we have expertise in Canada that could actually have a huge economic benefit locally and an environmental benefit outside of our country?
Can I just preface that? I'm a firm believer, as you may know, Mr. Longfield, that Canada, as a water nation or a collection of water nations, should be playing a leadership role in helping the world achieve global water security. I believe that this is the new peacekeeping, really, the new peacekeeping role for Canada. So I believe that this is one area where we have the capacity to show leadership and to benefit from that leadership, economically as well, by sharing our expertise with the world. But I'll pass it on to
Thank you. Unless you have something substantial to add, but that was a great answer.
I would just give a few examples.
Okay.
In the Global Water Futures Program, we did deploy the models we developed in Canada to Central Asia, to the Ganges, to the Andes in South America, and to the Pyrenees in Spain with great success. And there are clearly aid and commercial opportunities to do this sort of thing from Canada that have not been exploited. These were one-off pilot projects, but there's much more that could be done.
That's great. And I love the vision of peacekeeping, and environment is a global feature. It's not a local feature. If we come back to locally, I met today with the Canadian grain growers of Canada, and we were talking about the Guelph Statement of Sustainable Agriculture, the road to 2050, of how farmers are working on sustainability. And I was able to talk to some farmers that they brought into the meeting, one from the Lethbridge area in Alberta. We had one from Saskatchewan. We had another person from Alberta that were talking about water monitoring in the soil. And so on the other side, the drought side of things, and as you mentioned, the allocation of water. One farmer from Alberta said that his allocation is going to be 1 inch of water this year. And what he does based on that information is he changes crops to low water crops. He's going to barley instead of sugar beets. But even last year, the farmer from Saskatchewan said she was able to keep her yields up by changing crop decisions. And so how the modeling can impact farmers' decisions to put the right crops in the ground, knowing what the drought situation forecast could be. Could you maybe speak to how important that is for our farming community to have access to this information?
Yes, it's something we don't do now, but I believe the technical capabilities are there. They need to be assembled. They need to be operationalized. Environment Canada produces monthly and seasonal forecasts. Those forecasts could be used to force models, the same models we use for flood prediction or drought prediction on this seasonal basis. And that, I think, would have tremendous benefit, as you mentioned, because it would be information in time to be actionable by the farmers to make the shifts so they can stay in business.
And so the monitoring, not necessarily on the reservoirs, but actually on soil moisture content. And the farmer from Quebec said, I need drain tiles. He's got floods. So he has to make different decisions on getting drain tiles on his fields.
Yes, the monitoring, you can measure soil moisture from space with some accuracy, at least shallow soil moisture. But to get deep soil moisture, you need sensors in the ground. And that's where we have this Global Water Futures Observatories network, which has these sorts of things. They tend not to be done provincially, and the federal government just has them at Ag Canada stations. So.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On to Madame Posey for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. The floods, the droughts, of course, both are related to how much water there is and can take place at different times, last different time periods, and they take place in a number of different places, of course, all very diverse. And you feel there's an advantage to drawing this all together. Is there really an advantage to managing threats of flood and drought within a same strategy? And do you know if this is being done elsewhere in another G7 country, for example? Is there an optimal model?
Yes, it's part of what's called Earth system modeling, Earth system prediction, and this is where Europe has been headed with their approaches, as well as the United States. So the most sophisticated countries are going to these complete Earth system models, which have the general predictions that are possible for both floods and droughts, and potentially water quality episodes as we develop them in the future.
Et une autre question.
And another question. An article was published in Nature about AI. It seems that it's possible to be highly accurate, even if in rivers there aren't any sensors, any gauges for water levels. So, using artificial intelligence, do you think there are any risks to security? Are we far enough ahead, really, in our understanding of all this to use artificial intelligence for these purposes?
Artificial intelligence certainly has a role. It's essentially data-driven techniques, and where these models have been tested in Canada, they haven't done very well because we don't have very much data. We have parts of Canada which have a stream gauging network that's as sparse as the developing world. This is when you get into northern Canada or the really remote rural areas. So we don't have the data to train it. And further, we have, with changing climate and new types of floods and things like that, the historical data that would train the AI systems is not what we're going to see in the future. But they have a role, and perhaps in combination with some of the physics-based models that are out there, that they can provide some benefit. And certainly on the human side of it, they can provide tremendous benefit.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of the 2.5 minutes. And Ms. Collins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Pomeroy, you mentioned insurance costs, and in the next panel, we're going to be talking to some folks who have been looking at areas that can't get insured because of climate impacts. And I'm curious, this could be to Mr. Scarpileggia or to Dr. Pomeroy, do you have any concerns that this kind of forecasting could impact Canadians who are in these areas and their insurability, and kind of what responsibility does government have to ensure that insurance companies are still, and insurance is still available to Canadians?
That's a really interesting question. I would think that, I know that when flood maps are redesigned, and there are flood maps, the flood maps are being redesigned in Quebec at the moment, and it's creating a lot of controversy because all of a sudden, if you find that your house is in what is now considered a flood zone, you lose a great deal of value on your property. I would think that accurate forecasts, as long as they're accurate, then you're not getting a false picture or a picture that could be called into question. That you are getting an accurate picture of risks, and I suppose it could influence insurance costs, but I think the flood itself would have an impact on one's insurance, and that's why the government is bringing in. And I'm not speaking for the government. As I said before, I'm not representing the government, but the government did commit to a low-cost national flood insurance program for those who can no longer get insurance. And some of my areas in my riding have been touched by floods twice now, in 2017 and 2019, and people just can't get insurance anymore there.
two things. One is that the insurance companies are already running their models in secret. There's a number of them across Canada. They're all different, and I don't think any of them are very good. So some people are being charged for floods that they shouldn't have. The second is that if we can predict floods, we can reduce damages, and that should reduce costs all around the board. So that's so imagine what our damages for crops would be if we or other events if we had no weather forecasts at all. So the same thing for flood forecasts. We can reduce damages this way, and we should be able to reduce insurance costs.
Very good. That's it for 2.5 minutes. So on to Mr. Deltel for 5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And kind MP, it's nice to see you working on this. Dr. Pomeroy as well.
Vous avez utilisé, docteur, une image qui m'est restée.
So you brought up an image that really struck me, saying that every province and territory has built its own wheel, if you wish. So we've got 13 wheels we're trying to work with, and that the aim of this bill put forward by our colleague from Lac-Saint-Louis is to bring these all together in a single vehicle. Do you think we can do this quickly, or will it take years before all 13 wheels are rolling in the same direction?
The wheels are all different right now, and some are pretty sophisticated and some are very, very simple. So there'll be tremendous benefit early on for the jurisdictions which have no system or simple systems provided by this. The more advanced jurisdictions will also see it. In our discussions with them for the province of Quebec, they saw benefit to using both the federal and the provincial model that they had to give them some idea of the uncertainty in the predictions in there. So I think we can see immediate benefits all around. And because these systems all exist, I would think a rapid evolution towards improvement will happen. And then eventually, perhaps the concerted generation of the next phase, the next generation of prediction models can occur on a national basis. That will take longer, but it's certainly possible.
You also raised the example of the United States of America that has, and you said that earlier, that in some point they have that kind of system that the member of Lac-Saint-Louis would like to apply. Can you give us some indication how can we get inspiration from the experience in America that can be useful for us?
A number of things there. One is that they do not do it all from Washington. They have regional centers. Even though they're federally led, they're based on river basins. So northeast U.S., north central U.S., Alaska, northwest, and on river basins. They also coordinate heavily with the states involved and with the other communities to do so. And then finally, but they have the central resources for the supercomputer systems and the army of scientists that they have in different agencies, such as U.S. Geological Survey and their Weather Service and the Army Corps of Engineers. They have to coordinate all of this as well. But they've done it reasonably well over time, but still feel they need to make much further and much more rapid progress. That's why they set up this new cooperative institute to accelerate the improvements in that.
When did they create that facility, or I would say that attitude to work all together in the same front?
This goes back at least to the 1960s, and that's perhaps before. So, but it was you don't see the states doing this really at all down there, except helping with expertise into the federal system. So it's a bit of a different constitutional setup as well.
Supposons que le projet de loi est voté et
So let's say that we vote on this bill, it's adopted, and the Senate adopted as well within the next month. Based on your knowledge, what you know of the Canadian and the American systems, how long, more or less, would it take before Canada really winds up with one single wheel, everyone rolling in the same direction, all 13 instances, and that this, is working efficiently?
I see it still as 13 wheels, but one engine supplying extra power to those wheels as they need, because we have very different provincial realities on the ground. I think we can find immediate gains by data flow, by coordination, even by provinces sharing bilaterally information together. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba all predict the Saskatchewan River system. And so that's certainly an easy win right there to make that better. The final thing then would be development of systems that are suitable for Canada, where we have frozen ground, we have snowmelt, we have ice melt and river ice jams that other countries don't. And we'll have to find those solutions ourselves, and we'll have to make sure that they're in our system and we're not relying on what other countries have developed that way.
Last question. Do you think we can do that with no new money?
We can take advantage of programs such as the $78 million Global Water Futures Program, which is ending now. It's in the rollout period. When we built Global Water Futures, we knew we'd be building these models. I wanted a home for them. I never thought the home would be the United States. So I wanted to be here. And so you have that investment that could be leveraged here with really just a few personnel and some more meetings and gaining efficiencies. So I don't think it's expensive, not in the things that I've seen in the federal government. So,
Thank you very much. And for our last questioner, Ms. Chatel, for 5 minutes.
Ma question, oui.
This bill is very interesting, given that we should keep in mind that Canada is the only country.
Other mics,
Okay.
someone,
Merci.
and then turn that one off. Please.
Voilà.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. So let me start from the top, if I may. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us here today. My question. I think that this bill is very important given the current context, Canada being the only country, only G7 country, that still doesn't have any legislation, any national strategy to prevent droughts and floods. What have the effects of having no coordinated strategy involving all provinces and territories been? I could try to provide you with an answer. This is the example that I wanted to give you at the very end of my opening statement, and Dr. Pomeroy did bring it up. In Calgary in 2013, it was 2013 in Calgary, yes. Anyway, we saw that the model, quite a nuanced and well-developed model, quite sophisticated then, that had been worked up in Europe, and we used it in a pilot project, analyzing the situation out in Western Canada. And the model had predicted a very severe flood 8 days before the actual event took place. But that hadn't been possible. At least the province of Alberta was not at the time able to provide a prediction that far ahead. So I think the advantages are pretty clear. A little earlier, Chair, we were mentioning the costs for elaborating, developing a new strategy. Mr. Pomeroy, however, you are bringing up the fact that taking no action, given climate change, is even greater. The forecasting models must be very accurate, though, and very flexible. When they are, communities would be able to avoid the worst effects of these disasters on their local economies. Is that correct?
Accurate flood predictions can reduce the damages. Obviously, they can't stop the rain, they can't stop the snowmelt, but they allow time for reservoirs to be operated differently, for sandbagging and other measures to be put into place, for individuals to take action, including getting out of town. There are many things that don't happen with the lack of warning, and so the expenses are dramatically reduced when adequate flood warning is provided. And this has been shown around the world repeatedly. When we look at the deaths and damages in the developing world from floods, the one in Libya last year comes to mind. There was no warning system operating at the time. There was tremendous, horrific casualties and damages in that case. We already have small damages in Canada in terms of loss of life and things like this because of exceptional emergency services and all of that. But we can't be completely reliant upon those to reduce these. We have to have that previous warning. We're starting already to see the benefits of the federal system in that it helped work with the province of Quebec on floods 3 years ago and provided an accurate early warning to that region. So that was a test of that system. But again, that's not a formalized relationship across the country, but it was a demonstration that we can do at least as well as the European systems when it comes down to these predictions.
Ont beaucoup de difficultés là, avec son taux au front. Hein.
Agricultural producers are facing more and more difficulties. They're really on the front line with climate change. How could this strategy help them better plan their seasons?
Our farmers and water managers are seeing events that they haven't seen in their lifetimes and outside of their experience with a lead time of 3 and particularly 6 months. That's enough time to order different seed. That's enough time to make decisions on forage and others. It's also time for the irrigation districts to make their plans and make the announcements about the water that will be available to irrigation farmers so that, again, they can make their plans. So I think there's tremendous benefit there and economic benefit if we can do this. Right now we have a wonderful drought monitoring system through Agriculture Canada, but it's not really a drought prediction system. And the same software, the same computer models can be used for floods and droughts and many other things, and including agricultural productivity, including water supply for hydroelectricity. There's many, many applications of the system, but it has to be in place and it has to be running. So,
Thank you, and that concludes our line of questioning. Mr. Scarpaleggi, congratulations. You made it through the hour of questioning unscathed, relatively. And thank you, Dr. Pomeroy, for your words and insisting, Francis, there. You certainly bring the whole discussion of water up to a whole new level of understanding, too. So I thank you for that and for what you do in back home and all your research, because it does. I've dealt with you before in accessing your research, and there is some really good points there that we need to discuss further, that's for sure. So with that, I'll conclude. We'll just suspend for a couple minutes, and we'll get ready for the next hour. Well, do I have to gavel? Oh.
Oui, alors, on va. Merci à Madame Posé et Monsieur May.
Thank you, Ms. Posé and Mr. Mazier, for having held the chair. And I do congratulate you for your mastery of your roles and managing the discussion so well. We're now into our second panel. We have 4 groups speaking to us this afternoon. We'll begin with Ms. Wanda McFadden, the Executive Director of the Assiniboine River Basin Initiative. You have 5 minutes, Madam.
Committee members, it is an honor to speak to you today on behalf of the Bill C-317. As we all know, water respects no boundaries, be it in times of floods or droughts. So it's critically important that different water authorities across the country come together to be able to share standardized data and be able to share that with stakeholders that work on the landscape that rely on that data in a timely manner. I want to speak to 2 flood events that happened within our basin in recent years. The flood of 2011, which was a 1 in 300 year event, and 2014, which was a 1 in 500 event. These 2 floods were catastrophic in nature. In one instance, one community saw 11,000 residents evacuated from their homes, 4,000 homes and businesses impacted. The mental health impacts to communities in times of floods is astronomical and goes on for years and years. The flood of 2014 saw communities marooned without supplies for days on end, as well as rural residents. So floods also impact infrastructure, they impact farmland, they impact businesses, etc. So we need to look at that and work together collaboratively on those across the country. And as we've heard from Dr. Pomeroy, insurance is also impacted, which is a huge piece of the puzzle to those on the landscape. The flip side, of course, is drought, and we are starting to experience that in unprecedented levels. The difference between a drought and a flood is that droughts can go on for many months, many years, and floods tend to have a smaller, shorter impact, but wreak havoc on infrastructure for years to come and the replacement to that. So I think it's very important that we look at that. Both of these impact mental health, economic well-being of the communities. They impact the environment, the landscape, and all creatures that habitat those landscapes. And when I say communities, I'm referring to not to all communities, First Nations, rural residents, urban residents, etc. And they cross international boundaries. As we've heard earlier, we have to be respectful of the fact that water does flow across rural boundaries. So I would strongly, on behalf of our organization, encourage the committee to work towards the development of a true national strategy that would enable all jurisdictions to share data in a standardized and understandable format to prepare for and react to floods and droughts. In working across those those jurisdictional boundaries, they must recognize that those boundaries are municipal, provincial, as well as international. Communication, cooperation, and coordination are all common goals that will lead to success of this program if it's to roll out. You must invest in working with us, the grassroots stakeholders, groups like ourselves, the Indigenous communities on the landscape, agriculture, conservation. All of those groups hold a wealth of knowledge and have developed a network and a trust on the landscape with those impacted. And in many, many instances, they are the first responders on the landscape, working with local residents, be it in times of flood or in times of drought. Working towards creating resiliency where all stakeholders have the ability and tools before them to adapt to change in order to achieve not only environmental sustainability, but remain viably on an economical side of things for themselves and for the well-being of their communities. The goals of this also must realize that research and adaptation of best management practices and the utilization of tools that may assist in the process that is developed are key to its success. Transparent processes are a must. You must include transparent communication and information exchange in order to lead to success of the programs. And we must never, never forget the golden rule of water. Do unto others, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. So I'm very pleased to be able to present you with this information today, and I'm quite willing to answer any questions. We're very pleased to see this strategy move forward and would encourage you around the table to not forget about us, the grassroots individuals that can help this become a success across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McFadden. We'll go now to the Citizens Climate Lobby. We have, I believe, is it Ms. Lindman who will be speaking, or will you be sharing your time with Ms. Orlando? Who will be starting?
Kathy Orlando will be starting, and we'll be sharing our time.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Orlando.
5-minute presentation.
Thank you for the privilege of speaking with you today. My name is Kathy Orlando, and I work as the Director of Programs at Citizens Climate International and the Director of Citizens Climate Lobby Canada. I live in Sudbury, Ontario, and I've been concerned about the climate crisis my whole adult life. My father-in-law was Dr. Sukhdev P. Mathur. He was an IPCC scientist for the first report in 1990. I support volunteers in over 100 ridings in Canada and over 50 countries around the world in their noble efforts to bring evidence-based climate solutions to their governments and fellow citizens. Katerina is one of them. Please go ahead, Katerina.
Hi, I'm Katerina Lindman, and
Excuse
I'm a
me,
retired
sorry,
actuary.
Ms. Lindman, I hate to interrupt. With this hybrid format, we have to ensure that the sound quality is appropriate for the interpreters so as not to damage their hearing. And unfortunately, I'm told that maybe for reason of connection, they won't be able to interpret your remarks. Unfortunately, I'm sure you've submitted them in writing, but that won't take away from the time that the entire that the Citizens Climate Lobby has. Ms. Orlando, would you like to continue? I'm sorry about that, Ms. Lindman. It's just a health and safety issue. We tried to resolve the matter, but we couldn't technically do that. So, Ms. Orlando, would you like to continue?
Yes, I will. Katerina is a retired actuary, and she has been concerned about climate change for about 30 years. As an actuary, she joined actuarial committees studying climate change and sustainability, and she chaired the committee that created the Actuaries Climate Index in about 2013. The Actuaries Climate Index measures the frequency of climate extremes and shows that these extremes are increasing at an unprecedented rate. And so she did whatever she could to lower her household emissions and wanted to help Canada enact effective climate policies. Thus, she joined Citizens Climate Lobby in 2013. Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan advocacy organization dedicated to promoting effective climate policies. And we began in 2010 in Canada. We have two stories here about precipitation and drought. In the winter of 2018-2019, I, in Sudbury, Ontario, experienced record precipitation. Ice built up on the roof of my house. Professionals could not remove it. On the first warm day in spring in late March, the ice on the front of the house melted faster than the back of the house. The roof collapsed internally. Walls pulled away from each other. My house was condemned, and we were forced to evacuate. We lived in a hotel for over 6 months. The entire upper floor had to be reinforced and the roof replaced. We had special insurance, and all our costs were covered. 3 other houses on our street experienced similar internal structure failures, but not nearly as catastrophic, and they are facing huge bills to fix their roof and house. I live on a street with just 16 houses. Last summer, Katerina, whose son lives in Yellowknife, Northwest Territory, had to evacuate for 3 weeks due to forest fires, which were generally unheard of that far north. And since he only rode out of Yellowknife, he had to drive towards the fire to get south away from the fire. and a large contributing factor to the forest fires was climate-related drought. So droughts not only impact farmers and crops, they contribute to forest fires as well. Right now, Canada is experiencing widespread drought ahead of a wildfire season after experiencing a devastating one last year. Here are some numbers. Canada in 2023, the uninsured losses were $3.1 billion. Both economic insured losses with fingerprints of climate change were all over them, have increased dramatically over 20 years. Worldwide, economic losses of $380 billion USA is three times more than the amount insured losses of $118 billion US. So in Canada, the economic losses were much more than $3 billion, perhaps around $9 billion if we were to extrapolate. We have submitted a much longer version of this presentation, and it is below.
Thank you.
But lastly, we appreciate this. That Canada is developing a national strategy for drought and flood forecasting.
Thank you very much. We have your written submission as well, so the analysts will be able to pore over that. We'll go now to Mr. Sanford, who's been with us before during this study, and of course he is the Senior Government Relations Liaison, Global Climate Emergency Response for the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. Go ahead, Mr. Sanford, you have 5 minutes.
Please allow me to begin by extending the very best wishes of the United Nations to all. I would like, in the time that I have, to put the question of whether Canada needs a national flood and drought prediction strategy into a global context. On the global scale, because we waited so long to act on the threat, climate heating has gone away on us, and now what scientists and governments must do is chase after it with the hope of catching up and getting ahead of it. Our current global situation takes us beyond the first stage of climate change impacts, that of more frequent and intense extreme weather events and changes in global precipitation patterns, to the second stage of climate impacts on national security, increases in intra and interstate conflict, and the specter of an explosion in involuntary human migration that is already resulting in a rapid rise in climate refugees for which the world is unprepared. Welcome to the future. If humanity fails to rein in emissions quickly and tightly enough, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects that 1/2 to 3/4 of the human population could routinely be exposed to life-threatening heat and humidity. Food production systems will be severely undermined. Increased heat, stress, drought, soil degradation, destruction of crops by disease and insects, and extreme events could render about 1/3 of currently suitable cropland unsuitable for farming by 2100. Multiple breadbasket crop failures spanning several world regions at once would become routine. The number of people at the high risk of hunger, malnutrition, and diet-related mortality would grow by as much as 80 million. That would be famine writ large. By later this century, it's projected that as many as 3.5 billion people could be compelled to migrate out of their region, nation, or continent by flooding, storms, fires, extreme heat, and humidity. You will remember that Europe nearly came apart when it was overwhelmed by refugees from the Syrian civil war. We are already having trouble in Canada aligning immigration policy with our own domestic housing and expanding infrastructure deficits. And now we see we have our own climate refugees. By some estimates, as many as 200,000 Canadians were evacuated or displaced by wildfires or floods in 2023 alone, some permanently. And we're already beginning to see what scientists have already predicted some time ago. If we did not act immediately on the climate threat, we might find ourselves in a situation where we cannot keep up with the frequency of climate-related disasters. As the number of these events multiply, we will not be able to recover from one before the arrival of the next. And look at the heat wave, wildfires, then floods of 2021, and again in 2023 in British Columbia, and the heat wave, permafrost thaw, hydrologic drought, and recurring wildfire evacuations in the Northwest Territories in 2023. These kinds of compound events are already occurring in some places here with little or no relief in between. And as we've seen elsewhere, recurring climate disasters of this frequency can bankrupt whole nations, and they're going to keep happening. And as already noted, what is being missed is the mental health impacts of recurring disasters. Psychologists predict that if we don't get ahead of the climate threat, mental health effects of global climate breakdown will outweigh the direct physical effects on us by a factor of perhaps 40 to 1. And again, for this, we are unprepared. In closing, I repeat that we are in the midst of a national climate emergency. Canada, in my view, needs a national flood, drought, and wildfire prediction strategy. Without a strategy of this kind, a great many people could needlessly die, be displaced, and be unnecessarily traumatized, and parts of the country impoverished. One would think that governments that ignore this pending reality would do so at their own peril.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Sanford. Et on termine.
Thank you, Mr. Sanford. And we will wind up the testimony with the Outaouais River Keepers. We have from that group Laura Rinesborough, Riverkeeper and Chief Executive Officer. She is accompanied by Lisa Ryan, who will speak first, I understand.
For having us here today. Mr. Sanford painted a global picture, and I'll bring you very local now to the Ottawa River watershed. Here we are, and whenever your service brings you to the National Capital Region, you are directly depending on the Ottawa River and its tributaries for your survival. Our drinking water today as well, so cheers. I'll be presenting along with my colleague Larissa Holman, Director of Science and Policy. You recently met her. She presented at the Freshwater Study as well. We were just invited a few days ago to present, and the timing is impeccable. We have prepared a flow changes report in the Ottawa River watershed using data that has existed for years from federal data, but had never before been analyzed from a watershed lens. So to truly look at the data for what is happening in the Ottawa River watershed, and the results are eye-opening. So this Ottawa River watershed, it is vast. It has a surface area more than twice that of the province of New Brunswick. It provides drinking water for you and 2 million people. And the flow of the Ottawa River can be so great that it can exceed that of all of the Great Lakes combined. It has been given the moniker of the 6th Great Lake as a result. So we have a mighty, mighty river flowing through our nation's capital. I'll speak about our experiences with the floods of 2017 and 2019 that have informed our comments today. But it is also important to note that this mighty river is also affected by drought. So we need to take into consideration even our mightiest of rivers are impacted by both floods and droughts. In just 2 weeks from now, we'll be releasing our first watershed report card, and we've analyzed 14 different indicators. Changes in flow is one of them, as I mentioned. Despite the availability of flow data through the Water Survey of Canada, our watershed report card is the first report that has conducted analysis on the data trends for both flooding and periods of low flow at a watershed scale. The jurisdictions within this watershed are very complex. The river itself becomes a border between Ontario and Quebec. And when the Ottawa River experienced extensive flooding in both 2017 and 2019, many of you will remember that, it caused extensive damage to infrastructure, property, and to people's homes. Both the Ontario and Quebec governments attempted to address the flooding in different ways, thereby working separately to confront an issue that cannot be solved one side of the river at a time. We see a need in this context, like many other watersheds, where political jurisdictions need to be coordinated in order to ensure that the response is effective. This applies to predictions and forecasting as well. So we've looked specifically at Bill C-317 and have a few recommendations to put forward.
Specifically in Section 3, we'd like to make the following recommendations. In Section 3A, Ottawa Riverkeeper recommends that when considering the application of novel technologies in forecasting floods and droughts, it is critical to consider the impact on aquatic ecosystems and how to ensure riverine environments are not adversely affected. An example of this is during the summer, there are recreational levels held back behind some dams and in head ponds. And below those dams, we see examples of low water events that persist for extended periods of time. This has a very strong impact on ecological health and an impact on ecosystems as a whole.
I'll look at Section 3B, where we recommend that you consider how expertise developed in regions can be shared to ensure that all watersheds are able to build the capacity to undertake activities at a local or regional level. This echoes some of what Ms. McFadden was speaking about, that there is local knowledge, local context that can add value and confirm results from predictions made at a larger scale. Here in Ontario, conservation authorities in the southern part of the Ottawa River watershed have developed excellent flood mapping capabilities as well as flood and drought forecasting.
I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but we're at 5 minutes, but we do have it in writing. So, yeah, but we'll go to we'll try and do one round of questions. We're running a bit late. We'll start with Mr. Deltel for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Aux gens qui sont sur la ligne.
Thank you very much, Chair. And those of you who've been helping us, thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you, ladies, and welcome to our committee. Ladies, I would like to first ask you about 2017 and 2019. Most of us here were elected officials then, so we do remember what took place. Then I had to cross the river on a daily basis, my apartment being on the other side, and we were all, of course, affected by that experience. So what have you learned about the relationship between the two provinces from that disaster? As you know, the river links us. What could we learn from that? And what could throw light on the bill we're now looking at? Thank you, MP Deltel.
Continue my point on this.
Go on. Yeah.
And so what we see is that in Ontario, conservation authorities have excellent flood mapping, but they are not comprehensive for covering all of the province of Ontario. And so similar work can be done, recreated in the areas where there are not conservation authorities. And then on the Quebec side of the Ottawa River watershed, that there have been errors made in the forecasting, and that has had impacts on a number of property owners in particular. And so the data that is made available, the analysis done for flood mapping, needs to be confirmed with local knowledge and local context in order to ensure that there is accuracy involved, because there are considerable implications when errors are made.
If I could just jump in as well, sure, another piece there is after the 2019 floods, the Ontario government did a report on the flooding in both the Ottawa River and the St. Lawrence River, and found that that there was a number of different reasons that there was such enormous floods in that time. It had a lot to do with the snowpack and the rain events, but that one of the things that could be greatly improved upon was communications between the two rivers, and that was something that has been highlighted for the Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board, and they've been moving forward and improving their communications, but there is always room for improvement in how does this data get down to municipalities and people at the local level.
When you talk about communications, that communication between two provinces or two municipalities or jurisdiction to the people?
I mean, both. both of them can be improved greatly.
Okay, so with the I would say the experience of 2017 and 2019, have we seen a progress, or nothing have changed since that?
There has been a lot of improvements from the Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board in terms of the communications that they are putting forward. There is still, and there was another heavy flow event in 2023, and there was much improved communication at that time. I think there's also been an awareness that has been risen for the municipalities themselves on their responsibilities to let residents know what is happening, because many people were caught off guard in 2017, and then the duration of the 2019 floods was just so extensive that there clearly needed to be more support provided at the local level.
So we're talking a lot about local level, talking about provinces. Mm-hmm. So what the federal can do on that?
Pardon?
What the federal government can do?
Yeah, I see that the need to bring together the strategy at a national, federal level, that provides a lot of opportunity for the data to be confirmed. So the data that provinces have, that can be confirmed, that can be also confirmed, not rolled out at a grand level and provided in a top-down manner, but being able to be done in concert with the information and data available from more local contexts, that there's a lot of opportunity that can come by bringing those together.
The federal government also has the capacity to support some of these initiatives. And as we heard from the previous witnesses, there's a lot of great examples in different parts of the country, and having that communication from a national perspective will only help to improve models at a local level.
My final question: do you think that we could learn a lot from your experience that we had here, 2017 and 19, that can apply from coast to coast, whatever the river is?
I mean, I think that we saw, similar to what Ms. McFadden was saying, is that we saw people coming to organizations like Ottawa Riverkeeper to find out what was happening. We hold trust with community, and so I think that there's a role where organizations at the watershed level, at the local level, can help to ensure that there is confidence among the public around what is happening in that panic moment of an extreme event.
Madame Taylor-Roy.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Oh, just one moment. Sorry, I have to plug my headphones in. Okay. Checked earlier, so they should be fine. Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that. You said a number of interesting things in your comments regarding the sharing of local knowledge, and it's been mentioned a few times. Expertise developed in regions can be shared. And I'm wondering, I know the government, the Public Safety Canada was developing a national risk profile for Canada. And in doing so, they were integrating scientific evidence and input from stakeholders nationwide to improve understanding of disaster risks in all sectors of society. I was wondering if you know anything about this and whether you think this could be used as a model for how that local information is brought into the planning, the flood forecasting. And then also if you could comment on how you see the dissemination of that information, the communication between different municipalities or areas across Canada. And I was directing that to the Ottawa River Keepers.
So I don't believe we're familiar with the risk assessment that you spoke of. It's not something that we've responded to directly, but it sounds like it would be an important step to be taking when trying to understand how to properly put in place flood forecasting. One of the things that we have looked at is changes in flow and how flow is shifting in river systems, specifically the Ottawa River watershed. And what we are seeing is that flooding events, and this is not a huge surprise, especially this year where it is so warm and dry so early is that we're seeing flooding events are happening earlier. And that's not just this year. We looked at it in 30-year data sets to try and capture that from a climate perspective. And so not only is spring flooding happening earlier, but summer periods of low flow are being extended for longer periods of time. So we're definitely seeing impacts of changes in river flow, and that would definitely inform when people would need to be prepared for flooding events. These are beginning to happen earlier, and a stronger understanding of what can be done to prepare earlier in the seasons.
Thank you very much. And my next question is for Mr. Sanford from the UN University. And you mentioned that you feel like we're chasing after climate change with a hope of catching up right now. And we've heard several questions during the questioning around this bill regarding the cost of putting in place a national flood and drought forecasting system. Often it seems that people are focused on the cost of something without looking at the cost of not putting it in place. And I was wondering if you could address, you talked about some specific things, the impacts on national security, human migration, conflict zones. Could you just address broadly what the cost of not dealing with these climate events that are happening and taking action to stop the increase in greenhouse gases and climate change, the heating of the planet, what those costs look like generally to our planet?
Well, I think that when you look at that, first of all, I thank you for that very, very important question and observation, because we're only beginning to see just what those costs might look like. And we have to first determine exactly what kind of impacts we're talking about. When climate change migrations become a crisis of national security, the costs can be quite dramatic in terms of the loss of GDP, productivity, stability, public health costs, security costs, etc. And when you get large portions of the world's population undergoing exactly the same types of pressures, the costs can be absolutely beyond imagination. And I think Dr. Pomeroy put it quite well in his statements when he said that we have many of the elements in place. We're one of the countries that's very fortunate to have university programs that have been publicly funded over a long period of time that can allow us to get ahead of those costs. Because clearly for a very long time we've been saying the cost of no action is much greater than the cost in acting on it. And this is one way of acting on it that costs can be minimal compared to what the absolutely shattering economic and social impacts and mental health impacts could be if we don't. I'm sorry, I'm not
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, part of the difficulty is in actually estimating the cost of an action, whereas the cost of a program like putting in place a flood and drought forecasting system can be fairly well known, especially through the Canada Water Agency. When we look to these costs of an action, people are often at a loss to try and come up with numbers. How do you suggest that we deal with that issue? Because often we see that people just don't address it or don't try and estimate it, and we're left just with the cost of action.
Can you answer that in about 15 seconds, Mr. Sanford?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think that's been well brought up because what happens is we know what the costs are of damage. And we know if you calculate exactly what the cost of producing a strategy like this would be in action, we can calculate, and I'm sure the answer would be a fraction of those costs.
Thank you. Madame Posé, à vous la parole.
Oui. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses. One second. Mr. Sanford, yes, indeed, Mr. Sanford. In your opening remarks, you really gave us a global overview of the effects of climate change on life itself, on human life. You mentioned agriculture, health, refugees, climate refugees, more particularly. You covered a number of issues. There's something that I read recently. This is something I saw coming out in March. There are agricultural producers in Western Canada. For years now, there's been drought conditions, in particular in Alberta. So even the oil and gas companies out there are preparing for future water shortages. So I thought that was very interesting. We know that in Canada, the largest producers of greenhouse gases are the companies using the oil sands out west. And now these companies that still intend to increase their production are actually facing water shortages. So I thought that, well, it's a high-risk situation, isn't it? There being so little improvement on their side, these oil and gas companies, given the current status of, the climate change peril. So we know that these are phenomena that are getting worse and worse, the floods and the droughts, and I think that we need to mobilize science and base our public decisions on science. Can you tell us what's going on around the world on this level? And why is it that Canada is lagging behind? Because it seems to me that that's what you said at the outset. And what can we do to correct this?
It's important to recognize that agriculture is your baseline economic sector here that we're talking about. And if agriculture has serious difficulties in productivity and great costs, damage, et cetera, it's going to work its way up the entire economic ladder throughout the whole country. And I think it's fair to say that we're not necessarily lagging behind other countries. Other countries are trying to manage this and grasp what we are seeing as projections for future, especially with respect to population dynamics disruptions. But I don't think any country yet has fully come to terms with how rapidly this is happening and how extensive these changes could be if we're not very effective in moving as quickly as we can in the ways that we can to protect our populations and to predict as much as we can in advance, as much as we can, what these kinds of impacts might mean on a seasonal and annual basis.
En effet, on parlait beaucoup de...
Indeed. Mitigation is a big topic that's often addressed, and also really reducing our greenhouse gas output. I think that over the years we haven't moved quickly enough or in a concerted fashion. So now we have to talk about mitigation more than reducing greenhouse gases. Anyway, they're both important. Thank you so much for your presentation and so forth. I will now turn to these ladies from the Outaouais region. As everyone knows, the Outaouais region is of great concern to me. And climate, weather... Let me see. Yes, Environment Canada, via its Canadian Meteorological Services, already provides citizens with very interesting information, businesses as well, in provinces and territories, weather information that's accurate. There are warnings, official warnings sent out. But you think that a national strategy, such as that proposed in this bill, would also be of real use. Why wouldn't we just go over the current duties of the Canadian Meteorological Services? Wouldn't that be enough?
What we have is that not only does the federal government could create this strategy, but there is a need to ensure that we are still gaining the kind of long-term data that we need to inform these predictions. So one piece is around continuing to capture the historical data. This is one role that the federal government can play. So the hydrometric stations, many of which were active in this watershed up to 1990, but 44% of those have since been removed from service. And so we're finding that there is actually a decrease in how much we're measuring. So I can't speak to how that compares with the meteorological services, but we know for a fact that there is a decrease in this watershed of measuring on those flow levels. So that is one area where we would recommend to see that there be an improvement, and that could inform the strategy.
OK, on était rendu à bout de temps. Là,
Very well, we've come to the end of our time. We have 10 seconds. Perhaps I could very quickly add that another way that the Government of Canada could play a role would be by ensuring that all the regions in Canada have equal access to the information available, not only the provinces that have more stations. We must move on to Ms. Collins, but Mr. Longfield, you raised your hand.
After Ms. Collins.
OK, Ms. Collins, you have 6 minutes.
And thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. My first question is to Ms. Orlando and the Citizens Climate Lobby. Recently, the Citizens Climate Lobby published an article on the uninsurable world, and really highlighting how the increasing severity of flooding, of droughts, of these kind of extreme weather events have some pretty detrimental impacts when it comes to insurance, including insurance company bankruptcies, elevated consumer prices, increasing publicly funded compensation, meaning the damages are being paid directly by taxpayers, and the withdrawal of insurance coverage. And so I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this and how we are at risk as regions become uninsurable.
Great question. So what Citizens Climate Lobby does is our volunteers gather information, expert information, and condense it into documents that we call laser talks. And it was shocking to read the data that our volunteers have put together. Here in Canada, there's over 1.5 million high-risk households that cannot obtain affordable flood insurance in Canada. There's also risks of like people losing their insurance because from year to year their insurance prices can go up. We are heading towards an uninsurable world, and we need to mitigate the climate crisis as fast as possible. So one of our recommendations is that you have all this modeling data, and we're just wondering, wouldn't it be helpful to have like a business as usual trajectory versus, mitigating as fast as possible? Like we need data to guide to guide what is happening, because we are heading towards an uninsurable world, and the data is pretty dramatic in here. And there was a second laser talk for Ontario, and it was a climate risk report that was released quietly in the summer of 2023. And again, it talks about, unless we mitigate this crisis, the agricultural impacts will be quite high. So not to get into numbers, I encourage you to read these reports. And I want to thank you for starting this flood and drought national program, because I once served as the co-chair of the Sudbury Adaptation Panel, and we need data to drive our decision making. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, and also to sound the warning. And thank you, Robert, for sounding the warning as well. Really appreciated listening to you, Mr. Sanford.
So my next question are for the Ottawa Riverkeepers, and really, you've talked a lot about the importance of data sharing. I'm curious, as you looked at the couple of suggestions that for this national strategy, how you see, in particular, you're focused on the Ottawa, but in particular, more rural, remote regions, how this kind of data will support them and their watershed management.
So while we work on the Ottawa River, we work throughout the entire watershed, and so many of the tributaries would flow through some of these remote areas. And I think again, it's that idea of having equal access to accurate flood or drought warning systems that is really critical. And also there is, of course, the impact of what's happening upstream or downstream. And so if there are changes that are happening that might affect rural populations, it's important that that's captured. And so we can't just concentrate on one area because more people live there. We really have to understand it at the watershed scale.
Thanks so much. And then also for Mr. Stanford, thanks again for your testimony and really highlighting the existential threat that we're facing. Hearing some of the testimony from the Citizens Climate Lobby about kind of the uninsurability of certain areas, and there was a article published today interviewing a woman in Kelowna. She bought her home and is now finding it impossible to insure because she's nearby wildfires. Many insurance companies have pulled out of California because of the severe drought conditions. I'm curious if in your work you're coming up against some of these insurance impacts of the climate crisis.
Yes, of course, because insurance issues are widespread. And the other thing, from a global perspective, there are many parts of the world that are being dramatically affected by extreme weather events for which insurance has never been available. Poor countries that have to rely on their own governments to be able to help people after emergency crises that pummel them one time after another, places like Mozambique, places like parts of Pakistan. One of the things that I find interesting about this question, however, though, is it really is about growing uncertainty and how much uncertainty, how much does it cost? And I just came back from a series of conferences in the Okanagan where they're very, very afraid not just of the insurance issue, but whether or not their economy might not have to change as a result of how rapidly their climate is being altered. So what I find really interesting about this is that we're approaching urgency here.
Thank you.
The emergency that we're talking about is urgency.
Sorry,
Point of order.
Just a moment. Yes, Mr. Mazur.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to raise a point of privilege. On Thursday, March 21st, 2024, the Environment Committee passed a motion ordering Minister Guilbeault's department to produce information on how much the carbon tax will reduce emissions. The committee specifically ordered the production of the government's provincial territorial computable equilibrium model called EC Pro. This was a model that the government referenced to when asked how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30%. The committee also ordered the production of all economic modeling associated with this model. Ordering the production of documents is a privilege of parliamentarians to effectively represent Canadians. I will draw to your attention to page 983 of Bosc and Gagnon's House of Commons Procedure and Practice, which states, and I quote, "The standing orders state that standing committees have the power to order the production of papers and records, another privilege that is rooted in the Constitution and which is delegated by the House. In carrying out their responsibility to conduct studies and inquiries, standing committees often have to rely on a wide array of papers to aid them in their work."
Mr. Mazur, can I interrupt for 1 second? I just want to tell the witnesses that we finished one round of questioning, and unfortunately we won't have, even before your intervention, we would not have had time for a second round. So, and I'm sorry about that. But I just wanted to thank all the witnesses for their answers, for being here, first of all, and for their answers to the questions. So thank you, and we please. It's an open public meeting. You can remain if you wish, but I'm sure you have, may have other things. So suit yourselves. But thank you for being here today, Mr. Mazur. Continue, please.
I will also draw to your attention to House of Commons Practice and Procedure, which states Parliament is not limited in their ability to order the production of documents. Page 984 of Bosc and Gagnon state, and I quote, "The standing orders do not delimit the power to order the production of papers and records. The result is a broad, absolute power that on the surface appears to be without restriction. There is no limit on the types of papers likely to be requested, end quote. Chair, the committee ordered the government to produce their carbon tax emission model within 1 week of the motion being adopted. Not only did the Environment and Climate Change Canada fail to respond within the timeline ordered by the committee, they failed to provide the complete information the committee ordered. Instead of providing the committee with a carbon tax emission model, the government provided an 18-page draft paper that attempts to describe the model. In fact, each page of the document is covered with a watermark that states it's simply a draft paper. The document provided to the committee is titled, and I quote, Environment Canada's Provincial CGE Model, with a footnote at the end of the title. The footnote to the so-called model reveals that this paper is in fact not the carbon tax emission model. The footnote states, and I quote, please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated. Views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada, end quote. I'll also draw to the committee's attention to the draft document's conclusion on page 12, which states, and I quote, this document provides a work-in-progress draft description of ECCC's provincial CGE D-level CGE model used for carbon policy analysis, end quote. Once again, proof that the government has failed to provide their carbon tax emission analysis. In fact, nowhere in the documents does the government specifically state how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30% in detail. Nor does it mention how many emissions have been reduced from the carbon tax or the impact the carbon tax is having on the economy. This is very concerning.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Given Canada's...
Since we don't have points of privilege very often, is this like a dilatory motion? Is there a vote after it? Are we debating it?
Apparently, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk, I would have to rule on whether it's a point of privilege. And I'm sure whatever I decide, there will be disagreement with what I decide. And therefore, there could be some kind of vote, as I understand it. Is that correct? Well, yeah, my decision could be challenged. So that's how I understand it. So.
And are we to assume that we're going to deal with this for the remainder of until 6 p.m. or what time will we go?
Well, we do. That's a good question. We do have the room till 6 because we were expecting to do future business. But in any event, I can't interrupt Mr. Mazur at this point, can I? No. The only thing that could stop Mr. Mazur would be if the resources were no longer available. Is that correct? Pardon? We have resources. Nobody's turned off the mics or the interpretation. So go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, proves that the government has failed to provide their carbon tax emission analysis. In fact, nowhere in the documents does the government specifically state how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30% in details. Nor does it mention how many emissions have been reduced from the carbon tax or the impact the carbon tax is having on the economy. This is very concerning, given Canada's Commissioner of the Environment has stated that the government is not on track to meet its own 2030 emission reduction targets. Chair, when the government fails to provide documents the committee ordered, they undermined the committee and limit our ability to serve Canadians. Failing to provide documents ordered by a committee is a breach of privilege. I therefore ask to move my motion of privilege so we can obtain the government's carbon tax emission information. Thank you.
I have to rule? Okay. This is the first time I think we've encountered something like this. The way I see it, I believe that the documents have been provided. I'll ask Mr. Vancouver. Yeah, they've been provided. Yeah, I mean, but regardless, I think, I mean, let's say, theoretically, Mr. Mazur, if you had said we want the documents within a half an hour, and
didn't.
No, but I'm just saying hypothetically, and obviously it wouldn't be possible within half an hour. So would that be a breach of privilege? I don't. My gut tells me no. You did ask for them before. You asked for them in a week. You gave a week. Mr. Van Couverden mentioned at the last meeting that this would be very difficult, and we did get them maybe not a week later, but almost a week later. So to me, it's not the end of the world, that we got them a bit late. That's number one. Number two, my understanding is there is no, there are estimates, there's modeling estimates of how much the price on carbon will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. My understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, is that there is no data specifically stating that the price on carbon resulted in an X amount of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and I don't even think that's possible, quite frankly. I think you can do modeling and you can estimate, and there's good economic theory behind the price on carbon. So in a sense, we're asking for something that's not possible to produce. Yeah.
Just curious, are you giving your ruling right now, or is there an opportunity for...
No, I'm giving it. Pardon? I'm ruling whether it relates to privilege, and I'm just trying to share with you my thinking on this. Either way, I'm going to be challenged, I know. So, but that's my thinking. So I don't personally think it's a breach of privilege, since the information as it exists has been provided. But obviously, you're free to challenge that.
So it's not reasonable, of course.
Not in my opinion, but that's
We challenge that.
Okay. So how do we proceed now? It's a vote.
Yeah, it's a vote.
Okay.
Is there any debate about the...
I don't think so. I think it's dilatory. So, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You do realize, Chair, they did not provide the model that we asked for. Whether there's proof or not, we just simply asked for a model. That's all we asked for. And they didn't provide it. That was a simple fact. But you make your decision.
Yeah, I mean, that we could have a whole meeting on what exists, what doesn't exist, and what was provided. I can't. There's no. Il n'y a pas d'intervention. Point of order. À moins que ce soit un appel au
je peux faire un point d'ordre.
Unless it's yes, I can point of order. Yeah, sure.
More just in terms of process, are we, when someone raises a point of privilege, are members not allowed to also weigh in, much like
apparently not? I've only encountered this for the first time I've encountered it, but I'm told no. I just have to rule, and that's what I'm told. So, Madame Posey.
Non, ben, c'est un petit peu dans le même sens.
Well, it's somewhat in the same line of thinking. Perhaps, no, there's nothing we can say to this motion, right? No, I don't believe we can speak to this. We could check this if you'd like. So, all right, 5-minute break, and we'll check this to be absolutely sure.
a model is a set of equations, right? It's a set of equations and outputs, and it looks to me like the model, was provided. Now, if you feel you need more information, that somehow the questions, the data here raises more questions, you can table another motion at another date. But as far as I'm concerned, the model has been provided. Now, you could say, well, we'd like to see the codes, the computer codes that drive the computing of the equation. I mean, it's a never-ending kind of argument. But so, as far as I'm concerned, the model has been provided. If you feel it's insufficient, I would suggest that you table another motion saying we want precision on this, that, and the other thing. But anyway, there is no debate. Yes, a point of order?
Yeah, earlier today in the House of Commons,
but is it a point of order?
It's referring to what we're discussing here. And
I think
sure.
you guys don't like it when you hear other people. Very quickly, because okay.
You don't
anyway,
like being told that you're wrong, so.
No. So let's just go to the vote, because we have some future business to discuss in camera, or we can't really have a meeting on Thursday. So, Mr. Ali, is your hand up, or is it no?
Yes, Chair.
There's no debate, though. Is it a point of order?
It's just a point of clarity about the vote. Are we voting?
I've made a decision. I've made a ruling that this is not a point of privilege. And pardon?
Okay.
It relates to privilege. Sorry, it's not. That's a technical difference. But I've made a ruling that it does not relate to privilege. And obviously, there are those who disagree. So. Mr. Mazier has challenged my ruling, and so we're voting on whether people agree. Yeah, to sustain the chair, whether members agree with him or with me, basically.
Okay.
So, yeah. So we'll just go to the vote and be done with this particular item. Il m'a mis au défi.
He challenged me, and that's what we're voting on, as to whether my decision is sustained or whether you agree with Mr. Mazier. Rather, that's your choice. We're voting on whether you back Mr. Mazier's point of view.
Be sustained. Mr. Ali?
I agree with Chair.
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Monsieur Dadtel? Mr. Cram?
No.
Mr. Leslie?
No.
Mr. Mazer?
No.
Madame Posey?
No.
Ms. Collins?
I'm sorry, just for point of clarification, if I vote no, it's to sustain whose side?
If you vote no, you're siding with Mr. Mazier, I believe. Is that
Got
correct?
it.
But there's not going to be, as I understand it, just a point. I don't think there's a debate after this. Is there?
So if it's a no, then Mr. Mazer moves his motion.
Oh, moves his motion. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be debating his motion. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So if my decision is overturned, then Mr. Mazier will table a motion, and we'll debate the motion.
Oh, no.
Oui, la motion. On débat la motion. Go ahead. So are you with Mr. Mazier? Or are you with the chair?
As in, I vote no.
You're with Mr. Mazier. Okay. Okay. So Mr. Mazier, you can table your motion.
Thank you. Whereas the committee passed a motion on Thursday, March 21st, 2024, which stated, in part, the committee order the production of the Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territorial Computable General Equilibrium Model, EC-PRO, including I, the statistical technique to isolate the carbon pricing contribution, II, a list of all REF parameters, including the REF 22 and the REF 22A parameters used in the EC-PRO, III, the EC-PRO model that projected the carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, including all parameters, economic modeling, and assumptions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 1 week of adoption of the motion. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline. Accordingly, the committee views this failure
Point of order,
to
Mr.
comply
Chair.
with this committee.
Are we debating a new motion?
Yes,
This is a brand new motion?
It's sur un point de privilège.
Yes, on a matter of privilege.
And whereas, so I'll just go back to where it's interrupted. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline, accordingly, the committee views this failure to comply with the committee order and as a violation of its privileges, and that this matter be reported to the House.
We'll have Mr. Vancouver in here, and then Mr. Longfield, Ms. Collins, Madame Posé.
So before I say anything, for clarification, we had a vote. Geez.
Yeah, sorry. So, like, I think when we went around the horn when you were deciding your basically motion of privilege, the documents, and you held them up, Chair. They were basically, they had draft, they had watermarked all over them. They weren't even from, like I just read the motion. They weren't even from ECCC. They admitted that right in the document. So to think that they somehow answered the whole question of the question of the committee, and we can just ask again, is actually quite false. Like, I mean, it didn't even come close to where we were trying to get with this. And the reason why the details and the reference to the 22 and 22A and all that is because it was out of an order paper question that they actually denied that this is what the results are. It was going to come to their emissions and reductions, and everything was going to work out fine. Just believe us in the model. So we simply asked the government to prove that point. And unfortunately, this government, the ECCC, chose to absolutely just not refer to the committee at all. So.
You are.
Okay, great.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
So this is kind of the conundrum we're in, especially as an MP and trying to figure out what this government's up to. They keep on telling us that they're reducing emissions. That just pay your tax and everything will be just fine. And it is very frustrating. Not only frustrating to me as representing a rural area and paying a disproportionate part of carbon tax, but also to every Canadian. The number one issue that I was listening to for the last 2 weeks was affordability and what are we doing with this carbon tax. They couldn't believe that this was actually going up. The carbon tax was going up 23% on April 1st. Everybody knew that. And yet this government kept on plowing forward. And then to add insult to injury, they're paying actually, so a natural gas bill, I actually used this example earlier today. The natural gas bill of $100 is paying a carbon tax amount of about $110, $115. The point being that they did not answer the question at all in this regime. And I honestly do believe that we need to get to the bottom of this and get these the questions answered, and let's us see what we can actually do with this model. Because it's not really the prerogative of the department to actually say, no, we've got to turn this around and we're not going to answer you, committee. That is not the prerogative of the department. They have to be held to account. And someone is actually saying this is okay. I would like to know who from ECCC or who from the minister's department said, yeah, let's give them this, and actually write in there, oh, this isn't from ECCC. Let's see if they actually read it. Like, this is what it is. Please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated. Well, I'll tell you what, they're going to find out what kind of comments you're going to have.
Go to Mr. Vancouver.
Views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada. And here we are. The committee order the production of Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territory Computable General Equilibrium Model, ECCC. We went through all these IEIs and all these parameters, and whereas the Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within an adopted timeline. This is what, the second, third time we've asked for this? And then they just blow us off with this. It's totally unacceptable. And I think more that people find out, what are they hiding? What is the government hiding? That's what keeps on, people keep on asking. I keep on asking that. I know all my colleagues are asking that question. It's outrageous. And I do honestly believe we need to debate this. We need to get to the bottom of this. And all they have to do is just produce the model and answer the questions. That's simply all they have to do. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why they will not do that. So I do actually, I kind of wonder why. I really do wonder why. And you wonder why we're calling on the Prime Minister to bring in all the premiers, try to gather around.
I'm just curious because you did mention that we might run out of resources. Are we able to add ourselves to the speaking list on resources available today?
You can. I've got 4 people before you. Mr.
Are we planning on extending?
I think we would have to be done at 6:15. I think that's unless we ask. But can we ask if it's how much time could they add? Maybe we could ask them how much time they could add, and
we could just
find out if you got time.
Yeah, why don't we just say what's the latest we can go with the resources? You want to be on the list, though, Mr.
Sure, yes,
yeah.
Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go, continue, Mr. Oui. Monsieur Deltel. Okay. Mr. Mazier, are you still speaking on this? Or?
Yeah, I was talking about it earlier today, is how fundamentally, rural Canada has changed because of the carbon tax. And people are back in 2016, I was basically a farm leader at the time. I was president of Keystone Agriculture Producers, and I was around when Minister McKenna actually introduced the carbon tax. And we were promised that it was going to be revenue neutral. We're going to go beyond $50 a ton. But as time, and I'll have to admit, the farmers were leery, but we were trying to give them a chance, right, and seeing what this new idea was all about. And I was quite as you go forward 8 years, and by increasing the actual the amount of what's being the cost to farmers in general. They've tripled it. We're up to what, $65 a ton right now, and it is really starting to drag on the rural economy. So it is really starting to drag on the rural economy, and it's fundamentally changed the economic model for agriculture. And I don't think people actually understand what they're doing. We were talking about trying to provide infrastructure for water today. This is all about landscape management. This is all about protecting our resources in Canada. And we can't do it with this anchor of a carbon tax around our neck in rural Canada. So with that, I close. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder to anybody who's watching that the Conservative Party in 2021 ran on a promise to price pollution at the same price that we are currently pricing pollution. And the organization called Clean Prosperity said that Aaron O'Toole was right to embrace carbon pricing in an exit poll. They said, as part of his climate policy, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole proposed a carbon pricing system that would raise the cost of gasoline and home heating. However, all the money that you pay in carbon pricing would be deposited for you in a low carbon savings account. It was affectionately termed the more you burn, the more you earn, like some kind of a loyalty program for using fossil fuels. Now, in a hypothetical alternate universe, if the Conservatives won the last federal election, then in 2024, where we find ourselves, there would be a price on pollution. If Aaron O'Toole was the Prime Minister, then there would continue to be a carbon tax. We ran on a commitment to price carbon and pollution at the rate that we are currently doing so, which represents the integrity of our platform and the follow-through of our commitment to Canadians to reduce our emissions. Now, the current crop of Conservatives apparently have spun on their heels. They don't agree. I will point out that Mr. Leslie didn't run on that campaign because he ran a different campaign, if that's what he would like to say. I can make that point for you. Thank you very much.
I was actually just going to question the relevance, Mr. Chair, to the motion at hand.
Well, it's been a pretty wide-ranging discussion. But anyway, I mean, you know,
I mean, he ran a campaign on homophobia,
Mr. Mazur
not
talked
on
about
anti-carbon price.
Okay, excuse me, everybody. Mr. Mazur talked about the agricultural sector. He ventured into a broader discussion of carbon pricing and its impact. So, I mean, if we could sort of keep it on track, but I won't rule that Mr. Van Koerden is out of order or anything, but let's try to keep it on the topic of producing the documents that Mr. Mazur wants to produce.
The fact is, we spend so much time in this Environment Committee talking about carbon pricing, which is a mutual commitment of our last two federal campaigns. This is something that we both ran on a commitment for, and I accept that Brendan Leslie, MP Leslie, ran his own campaign. So you didn't run on the same price because your leader was Pierre Poilievre. But earlier today, Mr. Chair, a member of Parliament, Ted Falk, said in debate that the oceans are responsible for more carbon than humans. And a couple of weeks ago, a Conservative member of Parliament said that body heat was responsible for global warming. You know, we're not dealing with people who are relying on facts and evidence or research. And when we are asked to provide documents, those documents are provided. It's no surprise that the Conservatives don't like the math or don't like the evidence, because they've leaned into climate change denial as their policy plank now. It's not that they don't agree with the fact that our climate is changing. They've now decided that they don't like the answers that they've received.
Excuse me, Mr. Mazur.
I'm not doing this for clips.
Can we keep
I
it
don't care.
relevant?
Well,
I'm talking about a motion producing a model. I don't know what this has to do with us denying anything. Thank you.
Could you maybe
I'll wrap it up.
Wrap it up, Mr.
So,
help me out here.
What I suspect is actually happening here is the Conservatives are running this cover-up campaign because on the same day, April 1st, Premier Daniel Smith increased the price of gas in Alberta by more than the carbon price did. And, you know, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation freaked out about it. And that's, again, the Conservative base. So, you know, they're upset by that. But the thing about the carbon price going up a little bit is so do the Canada carbon rebates. Canadians continue to get more back through the price on pollution, carbon rebate, than they pay at the pumps. That's not true of a 4-cent increase to the price of gas in Alberta. But, I mean, these four members are not from Alberta, so perhaps they don't necessarily care as much about a non-rebatable increase that's more than the increase that you've just blown out of proportion, talked about ad nauseum, call it a 23% increase. But the price on gas was increased by more in Alberta by that, and you haven't mentioned it once. So if it's such an enormous concern, the price of gas affecting our constituents, then why not bring up the fact that it was brought up, it was also increased by Premier Daniel Smith, because you haven't mentioned that once. So, Mr. Chair, it'd be great if we discussed in this committee how we fight climate change, not refuting the facts and evidence from hundreds of Canadian scholars and researchers and economists who do this for a living, not calling into question a Nobel Prize in economics from William Nordhaus, who proved that carbon pricing lowers emissions, and not refuting the very fact that our emissions have dropped in the last 8 years by over 8% now, and much of that is directly attributable to the price on pollution.
Just prove it. Just prove it.
Now to Mr. Longfield.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In terms of the motion of privilege, I think what I saw yesterday coming to my email yesterday morning about 10:41 was some documents that showed some formulas, things that were being asked to show how the forecasts were being done. The document came from a different organization, which kind of surprised me a bit, but then given the amount of time that the department had to prepare this and get it into translation and try and get it in terms of our committee getting it to us before our meeting, I thought, okay, well, we see where the formulas are. We see the documents that they were, or the process that they are following. So in terms of a motion of privilege, I think the information was received before the meeting as requested. The information may have been incomplete in terms of some of the members. I was satisfied with what I saw. So I didn't feel like my privilege was being violated. I think the information was good enough for what I saw. We might want more information, and of course the committee can ask for that if some of the members don't like the information, but it's not that privilege was violated. because we did get the information that was requested in the short amount of time that they were given to get it to translation and to get it to us. So we do have some information. Maybe we could ask for more information, and that could be done without having to invoke privilege. I think that's getting a little dramatic. So I wouldn't support this as a privilege motion, but I would like to see more information coming forward. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Longfield. Madame Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. Ms. Collins.
I do think it's important for us to have this discussion. When I received the documents, I definitely was wondering if the officials or if the government had intentionally misunderstood the request that had been made. We want the data showing how the government came to the conclusion about 1/3 of Canada's emissions. And so, honestly, as someone who, especially when it comes to the industrial carbon price, this is a critical policy. I am someone who wants a robust climate policy, and I think this committee deserves to have the data that the government is working off of. And so in the spirit of collaboration, hopefully to bring everyone around this table together, I have a motion that the committee order the production of the model and data from ECCC that demonstrate that carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion. I'm not sure if I can move this right now, but I'm hopeful that we can have this discussion and then I can move that motion afterwards, and so that we can get the information that we need and that the committee members deserve to have. I think there is a very valid complaint that the Conservatives are raising today. I don't know if it's a question of privilege yet, but I would potentially support a question of privilege if the government yet again refuses to give us the information we need.
Merci de nous aviser.
Thank you for giving us a heads up of your intention, once the discussion is over, of course, of putting forward a motion, a supplementary motion. Ms. Posey, over to you. Yes, Chair. And it wasn't a personal matter when I voted against your decision. But this is a debate that I care deeply about. What Mr. Longfield said earlier is perfectly acceptable to me. And the motion is pretty much what I suggested to Mr. Deltel earlier. If there's data missing, let's just request the data and let's give them a deadline to produce it. And there we are. Any more information will be very important to our debates to help us think through a very intense climate urgency situation here, so that would suit me perfectly. Much like Mr. Longfield, however, I don't think that my parliamentary privilege has been crossed. That's not my take on this, but getting more information with a deadline for producing it, that would be very nice.
Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate my esteemed colleague across the way highlighting not, in fact, running a carbon tax and never would. One of the things that I think back on, one of those early promises of the Prime Minister was that in 2015 his government would become open by default. And that was something that I think everybody can get behind. And this seems to be a prime example of an opportunity to be open by default, to have information requested as to the economic and environmental modeling of what emissions would be reduced from the consumer carbon tax. And we've seen delays, and fair enough, this is complicated matters to hand in, but to be handed over a document that says this isn't made by ECCC, it doesn't reflect ECCC, and then just told that this is what our model is? Like, why is this believable? You're telling me that ECCC doesn't have any better data than 4 people? They're not even doctors. They're just people. I don't even know who these people are. Put together this paper, and maybe it was hastily put together over the last 2 weeks, but that would be either very worrisome or extremely surprising that there's been no homework done over the last 8 years of this carbon tax being developed and to put in place. It is not only not open by default, it seems to be, as my colleague Ms. Collins alluded to, maybe an attempt to hide this. This is why we're continuously asking for more money. And perhaps the motion that has been brought forward upon hearing my colleague Ms. Collins' motion is almost too specific, and I will happily support her motion because it's perhaps an opportunity to see if the government is truly trying to hide behind this by offering a very clear, open invitation to share both the data and the modeling, and perhaps I will support my colleague's motion as well. But there is clearly something here. I expect better out of ECCC. I expect better out of a government that claims to be open by default, and I think all parliamentarians of all political stripes should too.
Merci, Monsieur Leslie. Monsieur Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Le débat
Thank you very much, Chair. The ongoing debate here, for those listening to us, it's not about whether this is a good or a bad tax, the carbon tax, but rather as to whether we can get full access to the way the carbon tax is being evaluated. Because on this side of the House, you have people who have completely different points of view about the carbon tax, but certainly agree and wish to all get hold of relevant and neutral information. This is why my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, whom I respect greatly, even though we don't always have the same ideas about everything, but that's what a democracy is, isn't it? And let's bless our stars for being in a democracy, being able to celebrate that every day as we do in this House. But we're looking for the same thing. My colleague at the NDP seems to be aligned with that as well. And, of course, the NDP colleagues represent very well a good deal of this country, including a large part of the English-Canadian population. So has the government provided us with, as we requested, the relevant documents that we required of them? At least, Chair, our request was clear. The motion called for information from ECC, for the production of documents from Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's the department we were speaking to. And what do we see in this document that has been provided to us? And allow me to quote it.
OK, c'est un document qui est en train d'être rédigé, mais c'est un brouillon qui est en train de se produire. Bon.
It's kind of a draft that they're like working on or something. I mean, that's very worrisome at the outset. But even more interesting is as follows here.
Appreciate. Oh, yes, for sure. Ça, je peux vous dire une chose.
Yeah, sure, of course. As my colleague, Mr. Mazier, said earlier, oh, right, sure, of course, we'll have a lot to tell them if they ask for our comments. And even before all Canadians, and they should certainly have a right to speak as well, before all Canadians get to speak to the relevance or not of a tax carbon, because it's quite sure that the next federal election will be on this topic. Canadians will have a chance to decide for themselves. No, there's nothing here in this document produced by the government, which the government presents as being a thorough answer.
The Environmental and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada. Les points de vue exprimés dans ce document sont ceux des auteurs.
So the points of view in this document are the authors only and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada.
Ne se représente pas la volonté.
Do not represent or not an expression of the department's point of view. So that's where it becomes problematic, really, Chair. It's quite simple. With all due respect for my colleague from Repentigny, my colleague here from Repentigny, who is always very polite in all matters and nothing personal. Of course, Chair, when a little earlier we we challenged your judgment, it's just very clear. Our request is clear, and it's clear that we haven't gotten what we asked for. Very clear to us here and the opposition and with these other parties here. We're just looking for clear figures, information, and then, politicians will do their job. I'm not someone who questions the right to debate. I mean, debate is at the heart of democracy.
And we are as important because we are. There is here around this table 4 different parties. Hey, this is what democracy is all about. Yes, we will fight our ideas. We will fight for or against. We will address it. We will challenge the opposition of our point of view. Well, this is what democracy is all about, and the House of Commons is all about, and this committee is all about. We all do recognize that climate change is real and we have to address it. There is good ways to address it. There is bad ways to address it. And this is what the people will decide in the next election, which is the way that the people want to address it. So this is why, Mr. Speaker, to have a clear debate, to have an honest debate, to know exactly where we want to go, we need to have all the data. And who can provide this data? There is plenty of people who can do it. So this is why, Mr. Speaker, our motion addresses directly to the government. And by the way, we're not the government. This is not a conservative government. This is the government of Canada. So technically speaking, there is no party in this government. There is no color of this government. This is the government of this country, of the whole people. So this is why we are asking them, give us the data. Donnez-nous toutes les informations nécessaires.
So that's what we're asking them for, data. Give us all the data, all the information to help us debate this in depth. And of course, I fully respect my colleagues, MP of Mercier, any case, the Minister of the Environment, the Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mercier, yes, some area that my colleague here knows well. I'm not always that clear on who represents which ridings up there, but there are NDPers, there are Liberals, there are others. One day, I hope that Conservatives will be up there as well. But as I'm saying, I have full respect for my colleague. He was as a journalist, I interviewed him, and I've always respected him for his frankness and for his arguments, even if I didn't always agree with them. And so often he said, and he's even said here in this committee and in the House and when he's interviewed, right, left and center, that yes, this is effective, efficient, all the data shows that we're able to lower greenhouse gas emissions thanks to this new carbon tax. I don't agree with him, but I certainly gave him a chance to explain himself, and now we're giving him a chance to prove this with government data, government documents that we'll be able to demonstrate clearly, figures, and so on, that the equation is an accurate one. Unfortunately, that's not what's going on, Chair. That's why we are really disappointed to see that no one wants to shed light on the situation here.
The only group that can do that is the group, if I say that very politely, but it's the Government of Canada. This is Environmental and Climate Change Canada Department who can provide it. Et ce que l'on voit malheureusement, Monsieur le Président, actuellement.
Unfortunately, what we see now, Chair, is that the request was very clear, very detailed. We needed these documents and we needed these elements covered in the documents very clearly in black on white. We write it out here. And the department in the document that they have provided us with recognizes that their document is indeed nothing but a draft that's ongoing, that it can be changed, that all the comments are, welcome. They hope for comments, but that the point of view of the document, in the document, is the author's point of view, and it in no way reflects the point of view of ECCC or of the Government of Canada. That's not at all what we asked for, Chair. So, of course, if we delve into the document at page 3, we see a mathematical equation, quite impressive. I'm not going to read it because it's been some time since I looked over those matters, chemistry and physics, I'm 60 now. But there are a number of very, very intriguing, interesting equations here. But is that what we asked for? We asked them to explain how they do this and what the real effect would be. But no, they tell us this is not the Government of Canada's point of view. So I'm very surprised to see that as parliamentarians, given these very clear facts, there are nevertheless colleagues who are saying, oh, no, this is just fine as it is. So you have the NDP's proposal, which specifies that they would like more data based on, deadlines and so on. And I can certainly understand this being put forward by my Bloc Québécois colleague here. But, Chair, the truth will come out and the facts will become obvious. And eventually we'll understand what this is truly all about. After that, Chair, we'll each be able to present our points of view with arguments based on science, based on facts, objective and neutral facts that everyone can see clearly and agree on. We have seen very often, Chair, in debate, people saying, look, I agree to this because, I quoted someone and that seems a good thing to do. That's the right person to quote. And fine, based on such and such a study analysis, all very well. But this can be defended, of course, but for an objective discussion, we need common ground. We need a space from which we work, where the information is shared, where we all have the same information and agree on it. Best way to get to that point is to have the Government of Canada provide that information. We've asked for that information, but we asked very sincerely, and we didn't get it. Worse, the document that was sent to us is quite the opposite. It really reflects the fact that this is not a complete response, that this is not even a response from the Government of Canada. So our aim as parliamentarians, which was supported by the majority here at the committee, to access these documents, given that that's not what we've gotten. It's very clear, Chair, that this is a breach of our parliamentary privilege.
6:30. I'm just curious, are we going to go past 6:30? Or do we have the resources?
We have the resources for another 4 hours.
4 hours, okay.
Yeah. So I think, if I may intervene here, to provide some clarity, I think, could you read your motion again, Mr. Mazier?
Sure. Got it here. Whereas the committee passed the motion on Thursday, March 21st, 2024, which stated, in part, the committee ordered the production of Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territory Computable General Equilibrium Model, EC-PRO, including 1, the statistical technique to isolate the carbon pricing contribution, 2, a list of all REF parameters, including the REF 22 and the REF 22A parameters used in the EC-PRO. 3, the EC-PRO model that projected that carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, including all: 1, the parameters, 2, the economic modeling, and 3, the assumptions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 1 week of the adoption of this motion. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline. Accordingly, the committee views this is a failure to comply with this committee order as a violation of privileges, and that this matter be reported to the House.
Okay, so this is what the choice we face. Either the committee supports Mr. Mazier's motion, and I have a feeling that we're not going to get to a vote on it for another 4 hours. So there's that, or if there's a vote and the committee does not support Mr. Mazier's motion, as I understand it, Ms. Collins intends to come back with a motion asking for more information of the sort that Mr. Mazier and his party would like to see. So I think that's sort of the choice we're facing. Either we have a 4-hour session, in which case we can order dinner, or we don't send this to the House and we come back and Ms. Collins gives notice for her motion and we discuss her motion at the next meeting. So these are the choices. But right now, all I can do is continue down the list until somebody asks for a vote until somebody votes to adjourn debate. Is that, what would somebody have to do do we just have to go through the list till the end of the speakers, or can somebody say they want to adjourn debate on this? Either. So somebody could ask to adjourn debate on this, and then we'd have to have a vote. Or we can continue speaking. So right now I've got Ms. Taylor-Roy. Okay, Ms. Taylor-Roy, and I have Madame Chatel. Ms. Taylor-Roy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering, in light of the fact that we received the information that was requested yesterday at 10:41, we received 21 pages of information, and it appeared to me that everything that had been requested by Mr. Mazier was in there. Why we're proceeding with this conversation and this motion at this point?
Because Mr. Mazier does not believe that his original motion was respected by the government, that he does not believe that the government satisfied his request. And so he considers this a matter relating to privilege, and he wants the committee to agree that this is the case and send the matter to the House. And so
this is all the debate we've heard from Mr. Detel and others. This is not about getting the information, since we now have the information. This is just that Mr. felt that he was not respected.
Basically, it's an attempt to censure the government for not providing the full information requested
quickly enough.
Well, that too, yeah, but it goes beyond quickly enough. It goes beyond the substance of what was provided. It goes to the substance of what was provided, which is deemed insufficient.
Okay, so could I hear then the 21 pages we received yesterday morning at 10:41 there were 3 or 4 attachments from the ministry. What is it that is missing currently? What is it that Mr. Maziere still wants to see that he is not included in those documents?
He contends that it does not show how the government arrived at its conclusion that the price on carbon will reduce emissions by 1/3 by, 2030, I think it was. Mr. Maziere is not satisfied with the information.
Okay, perhaps he could submit to the committee what in particular is missing in those.
Well, he did that.
Pages.
He did that before. So he did that before. So we'll go now to Mr. Cram, then to Madame Chatel. Take you off? Okay, Mr. Cram.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just hope that we are all in agreement at what a routine request it is for parliamentary committees to request documents from the civil service. This is quite fundamental to our democracy, so we can see how the operations of government are moving forward and how parliamentarians can make better decisions based on that data and information and documents. And so I think it is completely reasonable and completely relevant for this committee to have requested the models that the government has been using for the past several years on which it makes the decisions regarding these continual increases in the carbon tax and the effect that they claim that it is expected to have on emissions reductions. Like that has been central to the debate that we've been having in this country for several years now. And I think we can all agree, after reading what we got back from the government, that this response is completely unsatisfactory and completely inadequate. It reminds me of the scene from The Wizard of Oz when they finally arrive at the Emerald City, and all of a sudden they pull back this curtain, and all of a sudden the wizard says, "Pay no attention to that man behind the mirror. There is nothing to be seen here. Just go about your business." And that is what I thought of when I got this response from Environment and Climate Change Canada. It has the big draft watermark across the front, and it says, on page 1, it says, "Please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated, and views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada." And so one can't help but wonder, if this does not reflect the views of the Government of Canada, then what have they been basing these decisions off for the past several years? That was what Mr. Maziere requested before the Easter break. We have not received the full model yet, or at least I hope we haven't. If this is all that they've been going on for the last several years, that is wholly inadequate. So therefore, it is perfectly reasonable for Mr. Maziere to continue to request these documents, and it is fundamental to our democracy that we receive what these decisions have been made on. Anything less than that is totally unacceptable, Mr. Chair.
Great point. Anyone else? Are we done with the speaking order? So I guess we can go to a vote on Mr. Maziere's motion. Okay, so we'll go to a vote.
Mr. Ali?
Do you support Mr.
Against.
Maziere?
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield? No. Ms. Taylor-Roy?
No.
Mr. Van Koeverden?
No.
Monsieur Datel?
Is Ms. Hepner here for something?
Leah Taylor-Roy.
Pardon?
Leah Taylor-Roy voted. Lisa's there. She doesn't get a vote.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Cram?
In favor.
Mr. Leslie?
Yes.
Mr. Mazier?
Yes.
Madame Posey?
No.
Ms. Collins?
Okay, so the motion is defeated. Yeah.
If we recess for a quick 2 minutes?
No, let's do that, yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, okay. Okay, does anyone else want to speak? Mr. Longfield, did you?
I think.
So where are we now? Where are we? We're yeah. I'm sorry, Ms. Collins.
This is just a notice.
Okay, we voted. Okay, now we're back. Ms. Collins, what is it? You were on the list there, yeah.
I was wanting to move a motion.
Okay, but you need UC because I don't think you've given.
I think we have UC.
Do we have UC from Ms. Collins to move her motion? Apparently we do. Go ahead.
That the committee order the production of the model and data from ECCC that demonstrates that the carbon pricing And this is that, quote, carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, end quote, including all 1, parameters, 2, assumptions, and 3, variables, 4, economic modeling, 5, and emissions reduction modeling, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion.
Do we have, does everyone agree with this motion? So can we just pass it on, does anyone not, do we pass it on division, or do I assume we have unanimous consent? We have unanimous consent. Congratulations, your motion has been adopted.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Does everyone want to adjourn? No objections to adjournment? Okay, meeting adjourned. Now I have a problem for Thursday because